Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176. Tywin. After the meeting, Robert hurried back to his bedroom. There was already someone waiting for him. Bang! Robert pushed open the door angrily. In the king's bedroom, a tall, slender, broad-shouldered man was sitting on a chair waiting for him to come back. The man's head was slightly bald, with thick golden beard on both temples, and his light green eyes were filled with awe-inspiring majesty. He was the father of Queen Cersei, King Robert's father-in-law, Duke of Casterly Rock Tywin Lannister, and sitting on the chair in front of him was his biological daughter Cersei. Behind the chair, where Cersei was sitting, was a knight in a white cloak, with a handsome and clean face, neatly trimmed stubble, and a slightly raised chin, which seemed a bit arrogant to others. He held the hilt of the sword in one hand, and stood behind the chair. He was the Queen's younger brother, Kingslayer Jaime Lannister. The king had not returned after receiving the report, and the Lannister family of 3 was chatting. Then, the sound of aggressive footsteps could be heard from a distance, and then, with a bang, the door was roughly pushed open, and King Robert strode in. Tywin, who was sitting on a chair and chatting with his 2 children, frowned slightly when he saw this scene, and then looked at his daughter. Just now, Cersei complained to her father about her husband's bad temper, and she didn't enjoy any happiness as a queen in the Red Castle, but was not as good as her childhood in Casterly Rock. Tywin warned his daughter that she should put the honor of the family first no matter what. Robert was the king no matter what, and it was almost impossible for her to divorce the king. However, at this time, Tywin seemed to understand his daughter's experience in King's Landing. His son-in-law has changed a lot now. He is indeed a world apart from the heroic young man back then. He is as fat as a pregnant woman, and the fat on his belly is bouncing when he walks. Your Majesty. Tywin stood up from his chair, put his hands in front of him, squinted his eyes at Robert's current appearance, and then spoke in a light voice. Robert, who was just furious and had nowhere to vent his anger, saw his father-in-law's eyes, and it seemed that a lot of anger in his stomach was released at once. It was not until this time that he remembered that the servant seemed to remind him that Lord Tywin was coming. But at that time, Robert was angry and completely forgot about it. Sorry, I just went to deal with state affairs. Robert was held back for a while, and then hummed twice, and the anger in his stomach subsided a lot, but there was still resentment in his tone. When did Lord Tywin come? Just when your Majesty was in the throne room. Tywin stood in front of the chair, and looked at his son-in-law calmly and spoke. I haven't been to King's Landing for many years. It's a good time to come to see Cersei and Jaime. Tywin's 2 children are in King's Landing, and the only one left at home is his youngest son Tyrion, who is not favored by him, so it is natural for Tywin to run over to see his children. Robert sat down on his specially customized seat with a creaking sound. Then he picked up his wine glass from the messy table full of documents, and held it in his hand. He nodded slightly when he heard his father-in-law's words. Yes, visit Cersei and Jaime. Okay. Robert nodded, and then found that the wine glass in his hand was still empty. He turned around and glared at the servant, who had no sense at all. Pour the wine. Yes, yes, your Majesty. The servant, who was standing behind Robert with the wine pot, was suddenly frightened by the king's scolding. Then he hurriedly poured wine for Robert, and because his hand was shaking a little, it poured it into Robert's hand. Robert glared at the servant again, but this time he didn't say much. Then the round and fat king picked up the wine glass in his hand and drank it all, and his slightly dark cheeks suddenly became rosy. After drinking a glass of wine, the troubles and anger just now dissipated a lot, and even his mind became much clearer. Then the king put the wine glass aside, asked the servant to pour wine again, and then looked at Tywin with a bright look. And Tywin couldn't help but feel a little bit of a chill in his heart when facing Robert's eyes, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Although everyone knows that the king is a fool, the king is still the king. As a person who once conquered Westeros and overthrew the rule of Targaryen, as long as he is not dead, he is not a person that can be despised and looked down upon by the villains. Robert's eyes even made the shrewd Tywin feel pressured. Then Robert looked at Tywin seriously for a long time and finally spoke. His voice was still loud. Cersei and Jaime are doing well in King's Landing. Lord Tywin can rest assured. Recently, state affairs have been busy, so I have neglected to accompany Cersei, but fortunately her brother Jaime is here, so it won't be too boring. Speaking of this, Robert also glanced at his queen. The elegant blonde woman saw her husband's gaze and quickly smiled and nodded. The White Knight standing behind the woman lowered his head and looked at the floor under his feet. He did not respond to the king's words. It was unknown what he was thinking at the moment. In fact, although Robert's words were very high-sounding, such as being busy with state affairs, it was also known to many people in King's Landing that the king did not sleep in the Red Castle all day. Sometimes, even the Prime Minister Jon Arryn had to go to Château's cottage to find Robert. This was the place where Robert lingered the most. The boss was a dark-skinned woman from the Summer Islands. Robert really threw away the dignity of the country. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The bold middle-aged man nodded slightly, and his voice was calm. He had just talked to his son about returning to Casterly Rock to inherit the title, but was once again rejected by Jaime. Robert drank a glass of wine again at this time. His face was a little red, but the alcohol stimulated Robert's mind to become more sober. He still looked at his father-in-law with a sharp gaze, and then suddenly spoke up when he thought of something. "Respected Lord Tywin, you are not here just to visit Cersei and Jaime, right?" Robert felt that people like Tywin would not come here for no reason. He was not the kind of person who would travel so far just to see his children. Otherwise, he should have come a long time ago. Chapter 177 Cast. Robert's words caught Cersei and Jaime, who were in the same room, by surprise. The two siblings looked at each other in bewilderment. What? He had just chatted with their father, who had not seen them for a long time, but he did not mention that there was some other purpose for this trip. Tywin faced the gazes of the three people in the room, and his mind was full of thoughts, wondering when he was exposed. However, after a moment of silence, he finally nodded and admitted, "Yes, Your Majesty's guess is very accurate. There are indeed other things on this trip." Since Robert had seen through it, Tywin simply stopped hiding it and admitted it directly. "The first thing is to tell you." Tywin glanced at Cersei and Jaime and then spoke. "Your uncle Gillian has passed away." "What?" Tywin's sudden words shocked everyone in the room, and Cersei and Jaime were the most unexpected, especially Jaime. "Father, what are you talking about?" When he and Tyrion were young, they loved playing with their uncle Gillian the most. Because the other two uncles were like his father, they were all serious. Only Uncle Gillian was the most lively. And the age difference between Gillian and Jaime was not much. Although they were uncles, they seemed to be friends. However, Jaime only knew that when Uncle Gillian was 18 years old, he sailed away on a ship and went out to look for the family's lost Valyrian steel sword. He disappeared for a while and disappeared again in recent years. He still claimed to continue searching all over the world. But Jaime never expected that the news of his death would come out of his father's mouth so suddenly. "What happened? Father, how could Uncle Gillian die for no reason?" Jaime's face changed from the carelessness just now and became a little ugly, holding the hilt tightly. However, Tywin glanced at his son, but shook his head and did not explain anything. Gillian was an undercover in Andalus, which was a highly confidential matter. No one knew about it except himself, the king, and Prime Minister Jon. But not long ago, the other spies planted in Andalus sent a reply, telling Tywin that Gillian had been exposed and was executed by Viserys with a cup of poisoned wine. 2 of the 4 Tywin brothers have died at the hands of Targaryen. Even Tywin himself has some doubts about whether there is really karma. He once betrayed his old friend Aerys and was merciless when he attacked Targaryen. Even women and children were not spared. Now the retribution has fallen one by one. However, Tywin's character is stubborn and tough. It was only because of grief that he fell into a little self-doubt, and then he dispelled these ideas. But in Tywin's heart, the name on the other side of the narrow sea has deepened his impression, and he has firmly remembered it in his heart, vowing to make the other party pay with blood one day. At the same time, Robert called on the vassals of the 7 kingdoms to gather troops to cross the sea to attack Andalus. As the Guardian of the West, Tywin naturally received the news. He personally supports cutting the grass and eradicating the roots. because if one day Targaryen really comes back with dragons and a large army, perhaps the Lannister family will end up even more miserable than Baratheon. Tywin was too ruthless at the beginning. He thought he could wipe out Targaryen, but he didn't expect that things would develop to this point in the end. Targaryen looked like he was going to make a comeback. However, when the Westerlands were gathering troops with great fanfare, bad news also came. Their good days were over, and the news of the coming winter spread throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Although Tywin's authority in the Westerlands could require the vassals to fight in winter, the price to pay would be very huge. Tywin hesitated and finally decided to set off to King's Landing to discuss this matter with the king in person. In the matter of eliminating Targaryen, Lannister and Baratheon were undoubtedly on the same line. The second thing, Tywin calmly told the news of his brother's death, and then continued. That is to help your majesty solve the current troubles. It's like letting the dragon grow up, which will be a disaster for the country. Oh, Robert knew the existence of Gillian. In fact, it was Gillian who first brought back the news of the dragon. However, he didn't care about Gillian's life or death. In his opinion, Gillian, who was undercover deep in the enemy's territory, would die sooner or later. He was more concerned about how Tywin could solve the current troubles. What does Lord Tywin want to do? There are two ways, your majesty. The middle-aged man sitting on the chair had a straight back, wearing a red exquisite dress with a golden roaring lion on his chest. In the Red Castle, Tywin was planning a conspiracy against Viserys. And in Andalus, time passed quickly, and another 3 months passed in a flash. The 290th year of the Egan calendar was about to pass, and Andalus was about to usher in a new year. The long sword entrusted to the master blacksmith Tob Homot and Melisandre to assist in forging was finally forged. Several prisoners who helped Master Tob forge the long sword were suddenly pushed into the furnace by him. This scene frightened Master Tob's apprentice. He did not expect his master to be so cruel. Melisandre, who was also watching, remained calm, as if she had foreseen this happening. The most indispensable part of Koha's process of recasting Valyrian steel is the blood sacrifice. That's why those pagans are so secretive about these things. Melisandre said in a faint voice, then turned her head and looked at the frightened black-haired boy. Soon, the news that the long sword was forged reached Viserys' ears. Now the silver-haired boy was sitting in a chair in a loose robe and reading a letter. This was a letter from Pentos, which had just been sent a few days ago, but Viserys was not in the castle at that time. Instead, he was inspecting the border of the territory in the name of preparing for winter, to see what preparations had been made here for the coming cold winter. He just came back this morning. The letter was written in the name of the Prince of Pentos, but it was actually written by several governors. In order to celebrate the traditional festival of Pentos and promote friendship between the two city-states, Pentos once again invited Viserys to visit the Pearl of the Bay. Then a guard came to report, "Your Majesty, Master Tob invited you to come over and said that the sword has been forged." Chapter 178 Dusk. Oh. After hearing the guard's report, the young man, who was sitting on a chair in plain clothes and with long silver gold hair freely flowing, put down the letter in his hand. Pentos suddenly invited him to a banquet again for some unknown reason. However, Viserys did not believe that it was the excuses mentioned in the letter, such as to connect the feelings of the two city-states and celebrate the traditional festivals of Pentos. There must be other reasons. This thought flashed through Viserys' mind, and then he narrowed his eyes. However, Viserys did not think for too long, just paused slightly. "Give this letter to Ramsay. Tell him to find out about this matter and see what Pentos wants to do." Then the young king stood up and said, "Let's go. Go and see how the sword is being forged." Not long after, footsteps were heard in the corridor of the castle. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." The servants on both sides of the courtyard bowed and saluted when they saw Viserys. When Viserys came to the forge room in the castle, it was still filled with smoke. However, this long sword forged with the heart of the Red Comet has just come out of the oven, and Master Tob Mott is sweeping away some dust. "This is the sword, Your Majesty." Master Tob, who was covered in dust, said respectfully. At the same time, there was joy in his eyes that he could not hide. He was very satisfied with his work. He had a hunch that this would be a magical weapon that would be remembered in the long river of history. as the craftsman who forged it himself. The name Tobmot would also become a master craftsman in the true sense. Although others now call him master, old Tob himself knows that a master without famous works is not a real master. Therefore, Tob's inner joy is even stronger than Viziri's. And when Viziri's just walked into the workshop, without old Tob saying much, his pair of lavender eyes were also attracted and locked directly on the long sword hanging upside down on the shelf. The dark red sword body seemed to be wrapped in blood, with a simple black pattern in the center of the sword guard, and the golden guard curved towards the sword tip, like a dragon's claw grasping the blade. The black extended hilt can be held with one hand or two hands, and is suffixed with a golden accessory inlaid with a red gem. The overall style of this sword is the color of blood, just like the red comet that crossed the sky at dusk. The blood-colored light even covered the setting sun, and then fell in Viziri's eyes. This sword Viziri's was deeply attracted to it at the first sight, as if he saw a ball of fire, and the heat waves were blowing in his face. Then the young king couldn't help but stretch out his hand and hold the hilt tightly, and the feeling of heat instantly disappeared, leaving only the clear texture of holding the hilt tightly and the desire to kill the enemy with it. Crack. Viziri's took the sword from the shelf. The blood-red light of the setting sun illuminated the entire workshop, even overwhelming the blazing furnace. Pictures flashed through his mind, and the handsome face of the young king was clearly reflected on the smooth sword. Give it a name. This sword is called Dusk. It will end the rule of the usurper, and perhaps save many lives in the future. This was certainly not a name given, because another magic weapon forged from the heart of the stars was called Dawn. Viziri's did not have such a bad taste. It was just that when he first saw this sword, the image of the setting sun flashed through Viziri's mind. The sun was setting. In the dim sky, a dazzling red comet passed by and even covered the light of the setting sun and the moon. Then, like a big hand holding a dagger, it fell from the sky and stabbed into the ground fiercely. After the dusk of the last day, there will be more luxuriant vitality. Your Majesty, this is a good name. Old Tob looked at Viziri's holding the blood-red sword with a sharp gaze. Seeing that Viziri's was very satisfied with the sword, he was relieved and responded appropriately. The red-robed lady on the other side also had fatigue in her eyes that could not be concealed. The sword was finally forged successfully. The hard work she put in during these 3 months was no less than that of Master Tob. The power of ruler in the priestess body was almost drained out. Every time she forged a sword, she personally used her power to ignite the flame. This will be the dusk of the false gods, Melisandre said in a flat voice. The true king of light and fire will surely defeat the alien gods with the Lightbringer and save the world. The doctrine of the red god is somewhat similar to a dualistic god, meaning that there are 2 true gods in the world, and the rest are false gods. The true Lord Ruler is called the King of Light, the god of shadow and fire, and also the god of heat and life, symbolizing the sun. Ruler's mortal enemy is also a true god recognized by the red god's teachings. He is called the cold god or the alien god, the god of darkness, cold and death. The endless battle between the two is the source of the long summer and winter in the whole world. When the Lord of Light has the upper hand, it is the long summer, and when the cold engulfs the whole world, it foreshadows that the cold god is ahead again. However, this time the cold god is about to revive, and winter is coming, and Melisandre feels that her connection with Ruler has become closer, and the power of the Lord of Light is also reviving. I don't know what the reason is. Viziri's held the blood-red long sword, shining under the hot furnace in the workshop. He ignored the flattery of old Tob and the brainwashing of Melisandre, and then turned his head to look at his servant. Draw your sword. The guards of the young king were slightly stunned, and then reacted, and drew the long sword from his waist. Clang. In the narrow workshop, 2 swords were drawn out, flashing with cold light. Master Tob and Melisandre both hid aside cleverly. They knew that Viziri's wanted to test the sword, and were afraid of being accidentally injured by the two. Although Melisandre was a witch, just like the death of Miri, although they could cast a curse, their bodies were still mortal. The cold steel sword would pierce their hearts and kill the witch. In the open space in the middle of the workshop, the 2 people pulled away. Viziri's held Dusk in one hand, his long silver gold hair hanging behind his back, and a pair of lavender eyes looked at the guard opposite, then nodded slightly. Attack me. Excuse me, your majesty. The guard gritted his teeth while holding his sword, and then slashed over with a sword. Chapter 179 Gendry. The guard mustered up his courage and slashed with his sword. Whoosh. Then the young king took a step to the left and dodged easily. Come again. Then the guard gritted his teeth and swung his sword again. This time, Viserys lowered his head and the long sword passed over his head. Then he thrust his shoulder forward and hit the guard's chest directly. Bang! The guard was knocked back 2 or 3 steps with the long sword in hand, and he covered his chest with one hand and gasped. Come again. Viserys suddenly wanted to stretch his muscles, but this made the soldier suffer. Your Majesty. Which brother in the castle had not practiced sword with his majesty? That was purely asking for trouble. The guard smiled bitterly, then once again grasped the sword and rushed forward and slashed directly at Viserys' neck. When they practiced sword, they never thought about whether they would hurt Viserys. Because since 2 years ago, 2 or 3 brothers had been besieging Viserys and couldn't even touch the corner of Viserys' clothes. However, this time, Viserys did not dodge anymore. Instead, he grasped the hilt with both hands and used the blood-red sword in his hand to collide head-on. Clang! A loud metal collision sound suddenly came from the silent workshop. The long sword held by the guard was cut off, and the tip of the sword fell to the ground. The dusk held by the young king cut off the opponent's long sword, and the blade pressed on his neck with a strong wind. At this moment, the guard felt cold all over, and the palm holding the broken sword also became a little weak, and then fell to the ground. Clang whoosh. Panting slightly, the guard really felt that he was going to die at that moment. Viserys slowly retracted his sword and then gently patted the guard's shoulder to comfort him. He was very satisfied with this task. It was a very good result to be able to cut off the opponent's weapon with one sword in the collision. Moreover, this sword is like a weapon forged from Valyrian steel, which contains magic. After cutting off a sword, the blade itself will not be damaged at all and will never bend or break. This sword is good. I'm very satisfied. Viserys nodded slightly, then hung Dusk back on the shelf, turned around and spoke to the 2 people hiding far away. This sword has just been made, and Master Tob needs to make a scabbard for it. As long as your majesty is satisfied, the scabbard will be made soon. And Tob also breathed a sigh of relief. This sword is definitely as good as a Valyrian steel sword, and even stronger. He has sufficient confidence. As a maker, Tob even expects to see Dusk compete with a real Valyrian steel sword in the future. Ice of the Stark family, Broken Heart of the Tully family, or Longclaw of the Mormont family, Lady of the Empty of the Corbray family, and Red Rain of the Drowdham family. As a senior blacksmith, Tob was naturally familiar with these famous Valyrian steel swords. Viserys nodded, picked up the tip of the sword that was cut off by Dusk from the floor, fiddled with it slightly, looked at the charred color at the break, and was a little thoughtful. Then he raised his head again. When he first arrived, Viserys was attracted by the bloody sword, but it was not until this time that he realized that the apprentice who was always inseparable from his master was not here. Master Tob, where is your apprentice? Viserys asked casually. Now there are only the bald Master Tob and Melisandre in the entire workshop, and the black-haired apprentice has disappeared. In fact, after 3 months, Viserys has already known the boy's name, Gendry. When Viserys first knew this name, he didn't react, because Gendry is a very common name in this world. At the same time, he also has a very common identity, a blacksmith's apprentice. However, it was not until the black-haired boy proudly took out a horned helmet and told Viserys that he had made it with the help of his teacher that Viserys suddenly remembered the boy's true identity. He might be Robert's illegitimate son. Gendry's biological mother was a waitress in a tavern, but she died when he just remembered things. Then Gendry was sent to Tob Homott's blacksmith shop by a knight who did not want to reveal his name and paid double the apprenticeship fee. Viserys also got these things confirmed by Tob Homott. Gendry was indeed sent here by a knight 2 years ago. He didn't want to take such a young child as an apprentice, but the other party gave too much. At that time, he also vaguely guessed that the other party should be the illegitimate son of a nobleman. The child's father could not take him back home openly and could only arrange a quiet life for him secretly. However, Tob Homott never thought that Gendry would be the king's illegitimate son. At that time, Viserys had not thought that Robert's illegitimate son would be caught by a club, using his identity to threaten Robert in exchange for a high ransom. Viserys had never thought of this. Although many people now disdain honor, Viserys did not want to become infamous. And perhaps Robert had long forgotten Gendry and did not care about the life and death of this illegitimate child. Therefore, Viserys did not know how to deal with this boy with a complicated life experience. Gendry's personality is completely opposite to his father. He is a boy with a very gentle personality. However, his body shape inherited from his father. He is taller than boys of the same age and looks like a natural blacksmith. He could not think of a better way to deal with it. Anyway, he did not know his own life experience, so Viserys simply ignored him and let him continue to forge iron in the blacksmith shop and let himself die. Gendry is feeling a little unwell and has gone back to rest. The master pushed him down the furnace and burned him to ashes without leaving any bones. Tobhomot treated Gendry as his own disciple and taught him how to recast Valyrian steel. However, he did not expect his beloved disciple to turn pale and vomit when he saw this scene. Tobho was a little dissatisfied. His Majesty the King was coming, and Gendry was still making trouble here. Then he drove Gendry away and cleaned up the traces of his apprentice's vomiting. Gendry also lived in Andalusburg, but like many servants, he lived in a shabby room outside the main castle. However, even so, it was much better than the former blacksmith shop. At least here, you wouldn't smell like coke when you breathe. And at this moment, the black-haired boy hid in the room alone, sitting on the bed with his hands on his knees, thinking about what had just happened and what the priestess said. Blood sacrifice. Gendry's body trembled slightly, and he suddenly didn't want to be a blacksmith anymore. Chapter 180 Ramsay's Snow. Lord Ramsay. In a dark and damp room, candles were lit. A young man with long black hair and a gloomy face was sitting at a round wooden table, flipping through the book in his hand. At this moment, the door of his room was knocked. Bang bang. The young man in the room heard the knock and raised his head slightly, squinting his eyes at the direction of the door, then put down the book and rubbed his cheeks. He glanced at the bronze mirror on the table and found that the gloomy expression on his face became gentle. He nodded with satisfaction and spoke politely. "Come in." Ramsay's voice was heard. Creak. The shabby door was pushed open, and a soldier in leather armor walked in with a letter in his hand. "Lord Ramsay, His Majesty asked me to pass this letter to you, and ask you to find out the truth about this matter." Oh. The young man named Ramsay heard this, took the letter, and then pulled out the letter from the opened envelope, looked up and down at the contents of the letter, and then a gentle smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It seems that His Majesty does not believe these Pentas people. However, this is also a test of my majesty. Ramsay raised his head again, looked at the guards of the castle, and then spoke confidently. "Please tell the king that Ramsay Snow will definitely not disappoint him. In fact, since Viserys gained a foothold on the continent of Essos, some nobles have secretly contacted him. This includes nobles who are dissatisfied with the current situation, and it is not ruled out that there are really families loyal to Targaryen. Among these families that secretly contacted Targaryen, the largest one is of course the Martell family from Dorne. Over the years, although Andalus still bears the low interest or even interest-free loans from the Iron Bank, Bravos' support for Andalus has actually disappeared. Perhaps Bravos also felt their concerns. They only wanted to use the Targaryens to disrupt the unity of the Seven Kingdoms, and they definitely did not want to cultivate a hegemon who would swallow up all the four directions on the continent of Essos. However, Viserys' power has now expanded greatly. He has been supported by the Andals and the Rhoynar, and even restored the territory of the ancient Andalus kingdom. It is no longer just a city-state, but can even be truly called a kingdom. The speed of this expansion exceeded Bravos' expectations, and even caused differences among the internal forces of Bravos, and some people were worried. If Viserys did not do as they expected in the future, he would not be obsessed with regaining the Iron Throne and restoring his country, but would stay here at Ease and plan to build another huge country on the continent of Essos. What should we do? Therefore, although the contact between Bravos and Andalus has not decreased in recent years, the funding has long been stopped. Dorne is different from Bravos. Their support for Viserys has never diminished. Prince Doran of the Martell family seems to be really loyal to the Targaryens and wants to avenge his brothers and sisters. However, Dorne's support over the years is certainly not unconditional. The new year is coming, and Viserys will soon reach his coming of age ceremony at the age of 16. At that time, Viserys can no longer use the reason of being too young as an excuse to prevaricate the marriage. During this period, not only Oberyn, but even his mistress has mentioned this matter from time to time. The lady in the political marriage with Viserys, Prince Doran's eldest daughter Arianne Martell, is 1 year younger than Viserys. When Viserys holds his coming of age ceremony next year, she will be exactly 15 years old. At the same time, because Viserys has never announced the news of the heir, he only secretly told the commander-in-chief of the Dragonstone fleet that he wanted to designate his sister Daenerys as the heir. Dorne, on the other hand, openly and secretly hopes to have more contact with Rhaenys, and seems to be interested in supporting her position in Viserys' camp. In short, Rhaenys has her mother's family behind her, or simply the maternal family to support her. Because Rhaenys' mother Elia Martell is Prince Doran's sister. Even Prince Doran mentioned in a letter that he hoped to bring Rhaenys to Dorne to live for a while, and he wanted to see the child. However, Prince Doran's request was rejected by Viserys in his reply letter, because Rhaenys was too young to travel across the ocean. Before Viserys hatched the dragon, he had received secret contacts from a small number of nobles in the Seven Kingdoms. After the news that he had a dragon was passed back to the Seven Kingdoms, such secret contacts came one after another like mushrooms after rain. This is the significant change brought by the dragon. After all, the Targaryens once ruled this land for more than 280 years, and the idea that the dragon represents the true king has long been deeply rooted. It is not that the usurper can change it after occupying the country for only 6 or 7 years. Among them, a young man named Ramsay Snow is one of them. He is not much older than Viserys, but for the ambition and unwillingness in his chest, he would rather take the risk to come to Andalus, so far away, to seek a turning point in his life. He doesn't want to be just a humble bastard, he also wants to be a noble. Ramsay's identity is very special. He is a humble bastard, and the power behind Ramsay is even more special. So not long ago, Viserys focused on meeting him alone, and based on his understanding of this person, he arranged a job suitable for him. Andalus' underground supervisory agency. Since the incident of Gillian Lannister, Viserys has learned his lesson, and decided to sort out internal affairs. Otherwise, he is like a public toilet, and anyone can come in. When Viserys was worrying about who to use as the first commander of this newly established Ministry of Internal Affairs with few people, Ramsay, this guy, crossed the ocean with ambition and suddenly appeared in front of Viserys. Ramsay Snow is the name of a lowly bastard, and it can be found almost everywhere in the north. However, he has another code name here with Viserys. Little Peeler. He is the bastard son of the current lord of the Bolton family of the Dreadfort, Lord Robos Bolton. As the family of the former king of the north, Lord Bolton is also ambitious, but he dare not openly connect with the Targaryen. So he sent his bastard son Ramsay to Andalus to show his sincerity. The Bolton family still misses the late king, and your majesty's loyal Dreadfort is ready to fight back at any time in the future. Ramsay Snow was lying on the ground, kowtowed, and even blood flowed from his forehead. Ramsay is willing to be a good dog of your majesty. Chapter 181. Petty Baelish. The sun was shining brightly. In the Sea King's palace in Bravos, a short and thin young man was standing in the garden, admiring the green willows and pink peaches in front of him. Winter was coming. Now King Robert was forced to give up the plan of expedition to Essos. The whole 7 kingdoms, except Dorne, were busy preparing for how to survive this winter. However, on the other side of the narrow sea, Bravos was still prosperous like spring. The locals said that the temperature had just dropped a little in recent times. The young man looked at the beautiful garden in front of him and was moved. He couldn't help but think of his hometown and the girl with red hair. He even fought with tears for her and wanted to fight to the death. It was a pity that the girl went to the distant north and he might never meet her again in the future. Lord Petty Baelish. At this time, a voice came from behind the young man. A man in a simple grey robe came over, and then the two of them said a few simple polite words. The city magistrate of Bravos raised his hand and made a pleased gesture. The young man named Petty Baelish also nodded politely, with a standard smile on his face, and then the two of them walked towards the depths of the Sea King's palace. After turning around in the corridor of the Sea King's palace, the two soon came to the bedroom of the Sea King of Bravas. Bang bang, the alderman knocked on the door twice, and two coughs came from the room, followed by a vague "please come in." Creak. The grey-robed alderman pushed open the door, and once again made a please gesture. Petty nodded and walked in. The physical condition of the current Sea King of Bravas, Ferragantalion, has become much worse than when Viserys saw him. Now he is thin, and his hair is grey at the age of 40. If he was not the Sea King of Bravas, he might have died long ago due to illness, but now he has a lot of precious medicines to keep him alive, and he is still lingering. Standing in front of his bed was a tall and burly swordsman, wearing heavy armor, with a pair of piercing eyes, looking up and down at the short man from Westeros who represented the Iron Throne. The chief swordsman of Bravas has been replaced. Former chief swordsman Syrio Fall was expelled from the Sea King's palace by Lord Sea King for some unknown mistake, and was asked never to return to Bravas. But now this new chief swordsman of Bravas does not have the flavor of Bravas at all. Instead, he looks like a traditional knight of Westeros, who is beautiful in being tall and strong, rather than agile and swift water dance. His name is Quirrell Valentine. Respected Lord Ferragantalion, I greet you on behalf of His Majesty Robert Baratheon I. The young man from King's Landing saw the current appearance of the Sea King of Bravas, and his grey-green eyes silently wiped a trace of surprise. However, he still bowed slightly without making a sound. He had never thought that a man who was said to control the world's wealth and the world's most powerful invincible fleet would be lying on a sick bed and look terminally ill. Petty Baelish did not know the specific political system of Bravas, but he knew that once the Sea King was elected, he would serve for life. But no one in Bravas wanted to replace such a sickly man. He did not understand. The Sea King was lying on the sick bed, looking at the messenger of the Iron Throne with a pair of tired eyes. He was about to say something when he was interrupted by a series of violent coughs. Lord Sea King, would you like to drink some more medicine? His chief swordsman Quirrell was a little worried, but Ferrag waved his hand and refused after a violent cough. No, Quirrell, it's not time to take medicine now. Then the man lay on the bed and looked at Petty Baelish again. Lord Baelish, is it? Ferrag's voice was a little weak, but he still managed to hold up his spirit. If King Robert wants a loan, I think he should go to the manager of the Iron Bank instead of me. He heard that the Iron Bank had just rejected the loan request from the finance minister of King's Landing last month, on the grounds that winter was coming, and the Seven Kingdoms had no ability to repay the loan, and asked to use minerals and land as collateral. However, he did not expect that not too long had passed, and the Iron Throne actually sent another envoy, and this time he wanted to see him. King Robert did not send me to Bravas this time to seek a loan, but he wanted to reach cooperation with Bravas in other aspects. Lord Sea King. Speaking of business, Petty slightly straightened his face and spoke seriously. I just came from Pentus. Oh. When Frege heard the words of the Iron Throne representative, there was no surprise in his eyes. It seemed that he had already known that Petty Baelish came from Pentus. Cooperation. I wonder what kind of cooperation King Robert wants to start with Bravas. The Sea King was lying on the hospital bed. His voice was still weak, but it was full of inexplicable pressure, which made Littlefinger, who had been a lobbyist for a long time, feel his heartbeat speed up. It is much more difficult to persuade a man like the Sea King of Bravas than the governors of Pentus. Petty Baelish was recommended by the Prime Minister John Arryn for this trip. The old Duke discovered the outstanding ability of this young man very early. At that time, it was his wife Lysa who recommended him. Although Petty was born in a small family with no influence, his father and the Tully family formed a friendship during the War of the Nine Copper Kings. Therefore, Petty, who lived in Riverrun as an adopted son since childhood, became good friends with the two sisters of the Tully family. Therefore, the old Duke did not doubt anything, especially during the period when Petty was the tax collector of Gulltown. The local tax revenue increased by more than 10 times, which made John Arryn recognize his ability. So this extremely important visit recommended Petty Baelish to give it a try. Of course, it is to cooperate to solve the biggest threat to Bravas and the Iron Throne. Lord Sea King. Petty carefully considered his words, looking at the Sea King of Bravas lying on the bed. constantly reminding himself that the other party is one of the most powerful people in the world. Son of the Mad King, Viserys Targaryen. His existence has far exceeded Bravos' expectations, hasn't it? He has dragons, and the blocking mountains are not enough to stop the dragon's footsteps. Chapter 182 Surveillance. However, after Petty Baelish's bold words fell, the room was indeed silent. Little Fina thought that his words should hit the nail on the head of the Sea King. After all, although there was no direct evidence to prove that Bravos secretly supported the Targaryens, it was indeed a well-known fact. Just as Dawn was secretly supporting the development of Andalus and transporting a large amount of materials. Otherwise, no matter how great Viserys' ability was, he would not have been able to create such a huge foundation out of thin air when he had nothing in his hands. Even the craftsmen who built the castle were borrowed from Bravos and Dawn. The reason why Bravos did this was also very clear. The size of the Seven Kingdoms after unification was indeed too large. The rule of Targaryen was once deeply rooted, and it was difficult for them to intervene. However, Westeros is now in a state of change. The Targaryen dynasty was overthrown and replaced by the Baratheon dynasty. So Bravos naturally hopes to take advantage of this good opportunity to reach out to Westeros. Now, I don't know how many nobles in the Seven Kingdoms have been on the verge of bankruptcy, and they have only managed to survive by secretly obtaining loans from the Iron Bank. If you receive a favor today, you will definitely repay it double in the future. Viserys is just a pawn of Bravos to disrupt Westeros. But this pawn is now gradually growing into a chess player, which will inevitably hit the bottom line of Bravos. This is a key point that Petty thinks he has grasped. The Sea King of Bravos lay on the hospital bed and stared at Petty Baelish, his pair of dull eyes without any spirit. He was silent for a long time, and then his chest rose and fell and he took 2 breaths. Lord Baelish, why is Andalus the biggest threat to Bravos? Ferrex's tone was flat. The young man from King's Landing perked up slightly. What he feared most was that the Sea King of Bravos would deny it flatly, be unwilling to talk to him about this matter, and even drive him away. In that case, no matter how capable Littlefinger was, he would not be able to complete the task assigned by King Robert. As long as the Sea King is willing to continue talking to him about this topic, Petty Baelish will be able to convince Bravos and Targaryen to become enemies, forming the encirclement planned by Lord Tywin and locking the remnants of Targaryen in this land. Andalus's current growth scale has reached its upper limit. There is Bravos in the north, Pentus in the south, and Norvis surrounded by mountains to the west. Andalus must break through if it wants to continue to develop. And if the Iron Throne follows the original plan of the Battle of the 9 Copper Plate Kings and launches an expedition to completely eliminate the remnants of Targaryen, there will be no follow-up. But winter comes at the wrong time. Tywin and Robert had a long talk. He was not afraid of the dragons of the Targaryen family. After all, dragons can't grow too big in 2 or 3 years. As long as more giant crossbows are built during this period, it will be enough to threaten the dragons in the sky. Although it is not 100% guaranteed that the giant dragon Meryxes can be shot and killed like the Dornishmen did in the past, at least these dragons cannot attack recklessly. As for the war on the ground, the huge 7 kingdoms, even if they fight across the sea, have far more troops and armaments than a small Andalus. The boundless army will overwhelm this city-state. This is the strength of a great country. After all, the main body of the war is still the army, not the dragon. Therefore, the Duke of Casterly Rock is most worried that when the 7 kingdoms are struggling to survive the winter, Andalus will take the opportunity to expand again, and even break through the encirclement formed by the trade city-states. If Targaryen really becomes the overlord of the Essos continent, then the 7 kingdoms will be unable to destroy the other side by themselves. Duke Tywin's strategy is also a strategy of forming alliances. The rapid development of Andalus will inevitably pose a threat to the surrounding free trade city-states. As long as this kind of fear is used well, even if they cannot organize a coalition to encircle and suppress Andalus, at least they can unite to suppress the development of Andalus. Dragon. Littlefinger spread his hands and emphasized again with a heavier tone. Lord Sea King, you must know what kind of creature a dragon is. From what I know, there is no limit to the growth of a dragon in its lifetime. Vaga. The dragon of Queen Visalia, sister of Egan the Conqueror, was 181 years old when it died. It was the oldest and largest dragon in Westeros, almost comparable to Balerion, the Black Death. Its roar could make Storm's End tremble. And the same is true of human ambition. Petty's tone was heavy, as if he was really worried about the future of Bravos. What does an infinitely growing dragon mean? It means that in the next 100 years, the power of the Targaryens will be infinitely magnified with the growth of the dragon. If the 3 Targaryens dragons all grow to the size of their ancestors, I'm afraid that at that time, Viserys' descendants will also devour everything in the entire Essos continent, and Bravos will not be spared. A lion does not walk with a deer. Lord Littlefinger, the smallest of the 5-Finger Peninsula, gave a warning, which seemed to be meaningful. The weak king of Bravos, who was lying on the hospital bed, smiled inexplicably when he heard this, and then spoke calmly. Do you mean, is Bravos a deer or a lion? However, before Baelish could explain, the king of Bravos shook his head slightly. Bravos is neither a deer nor a lion, but a titan. Giants are not afraid of dragons. Then Ferrego coughed violently a few more times, and then closed the door, and sent him away. I understand what you mean, Lord Baelish. Please tell King Robert that Bravos has no intention of intervening in the power struggle on the Iron Throne, whether it is Baratheon or Targaryen, the real king, or the fake king. The king of Bravos suddenly wanted to drive him away, and Petty was a little unprepared, and his handsome face was full of surprise. But since the king of Bravos had already spoken, he had no choice but to bow slightly politely, and then leave the king of Bravos' bedroom. Soon the king of Bravos' bedroom fell into silence. Ferragon Talion lay quietly on the hospital bed with his eyes slightly closed. No one knew what he was thinking about. Then he opened his eyes again and spoke. Quirrell, I need the help of the House of Black and White. Lord Seeking? His chief swordsman was a little surprised. He didn't expect that Lord Seeking would want to use the power of the Faceless Men. This force is not so easy to use. Normally, Seeking rarely uses this part of power. I need to find out what the child Viserys did. Not just the superficial ones. Seeking's words made no secret of the fact that Bravos had been monitoring Viserys. Understood. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183 Future Plans. Viserys' sudden appointment of a man named Ramsay Snow did not cause much ripples in the Andalus regime. After all, it was an organization with only a few people. Although it was named Ministry of Internal Affairs, there were actually too few people. And Viserys did not explain anything about this. Viserys may know more about little Skinner Ramsay Snow than his biological father, the Earl of the Dreadfort, Rose Bolton. This is a cunning and cold-blooded man. He may not be very smart, but he still has certain planning and manipulation abilities. He often takes a different approach to achieve his goals beyond everyone's expectations. However, he prefers and even insists on pathological behaviors of abuse. He is a complete pervert. And the most important and most valued by Viserys is his ambition. As long as he makes full use of this man's ambition, Viserys can use him to do more things before his value is exhausted. In short, this is Ramsay's own evaluation of himself. A good dog. He hopes that Viserys can take him in, even if he is a dog crawling on the ground. In Ramsay's opinion, this is a golden opportunity. Originally, in the Dreadfort, he could only live with Reek in a dirty and smelly environment. If it weren't for this opportunity, his father Rose Bolton needed a representative to go to Andalus to bet on both sides, and he might not have had a chance to turn things around. As for the Earl of the Dreadfort, he has his own legitimate heir, and sending an insignificant bastard to Targaryen is insignificant. If King Robert wins, he will sacrifice the bastard, and if Targaryen wins, Rose can also reap the fruits of the bet, because of the advance bet. As for Ramsay himself, who cares? Perhaps Ramsay himself also deeply understands this truth, so he kowtows desperately like pounding garlic, hoping to seize this opportunity and get the appreciation of the young dragon. If he can accompany Targaryen to attack King's Landing in the future, the worst result is that he can get a surname of Bolton, and it is even possible to take another surname to open up a family. And will such a ferocious and dangerous dog bite back on himself in the future? In the room, the pen slid gently on the paper, making a rustling sound. Viserys shook his head slightly. In fact, the way of looking at problems will change depending on the angle. As a king, he needs loyal generals like the commander of the Dragonstone fleet and Bessie, and also people like Evan Perth of the Royna who surrender. And a ferocious dog like Ramsay also has a reason to exist, and sometimes he can play an extraordinary role. He can do things for the king that he doesn't want to do. If it causes serious consequences, Viserys can put all the blame on him, and then plant the crime of bewitching the king, and deceiving his superiors and subordinates, and kill him with a knife on behalf of justice. Therefore, everything about the little skinning is based on himself, and Viserys can deprive him of his dog life and what he has with just one word. And he believes that Ramsay himself is also very clear about this. He can only try his best to complete every task assigned by Viserys, improve his status in Viserys' heart, and become a truly useful person, so that Viserys will think twice when he considers killing him in the future. Rustle, there is only the sound of Viserys writing at his desk in the silent direction. Under the gentle candlelight, the side of the boy's face was half immersed in the light and darkness, and his pair of lavender eyes flashed with light, revealing an expression of serious thinking from time to time, and then continued to write something rustlingly. I don't know how long it has been. It was late at night and quiet. The drizzle outside the window gently knocked on the window and made a crackling sound, and Viserys finally stopped writing and stretched his body slightly. It's done. Regarding the future plan and the prototype of the kingdom, Viserys roughly listed a charter. The news of the coming of winter has spread throughout the 7 kingdoms, and naturally it cannot be hidden from Viserys, who also has spies in King's Landing. With the defeat of the Dragonstone fleet, Viserys suffered the biggest defeat in his life so far. At that time, King Robert was going to cross the sea to attack Andalus with great fanfare. Although Viserys didn't see anything on the surface, he had a cool and unrestrained look of being able to fight to the end, but Viserys was actually very nervous inside. This was different from the Khals that defeated Khal Drogo. It was a sudden encounter, and neither side was prepared. Moreover, Drogo was very arrogant and wanted to eat Viserys in one bite, but in the end, Viserys pretended to be a pig and ate the tiger, and he defended the city to the death and ate it. If Robert really led the Knights of the 7 Kingdoms across the sea to attack Andalus this time, Viserys could almost imagine the endless ships and the knights in shining helmets and armor galloping on the Andalus plain. Viserys didn't say it on the surface, but at that time he even had the idea of abandoning the city and fleeing to the Norvus Mountains to fight guerrilla warfare. If the coalition forces of the 7 Kingdoms wanted to chase, they could chase them into the mountains. Viserys was confident that he would drag them down at that time, but now the opportunity is rare. Since there is no need to fight, we should seize the time to develop ourselves and resolve internal conflicts. The plan and construction that Viserys wrote over time late at night was to develop his own power while Westeros was enduring the cold winter. Once upon a time, Andalus was only a prototype of a kingdom, just an area centered on Andalus. However, now Viserys wants to turn this prototype into a real kingdom, change the military system, establish several legions, build a defense system on the border, support local nobles to build castles and towns, etc. As a real kingdom, it naturally has its own capital. In addition to Andalus, Viserys is actually more optimistic about another place. That is, as Viserys' eyes fell on a point on the map, Pentos. The night rain outside the window was drizzling, and the breeze drilled in through the gaps in the window. The candlelight swayed gently. In the plan that Viserys had just written, the advantages and disadvantages of Pentos and Andalus were listed. The advantage of Andalus is that it is a city built by Viserys himself, and his prestige here is extremely high. And the advantages of Pentos are naturally needless to say. Such a pearl in the bay, the geographical location, economic strength, population size, and historical heritage far surpass Andalus. Pentos. Viserys looked at the map spread out on the table. It turned out that Viserys had secretly set his sights on his neighbor in Pentos. Chapter 184 Intelligence. The next morning, because he stayed up until the bat hour last night. Viserys got up a little late in the morning, but he still got out of bed when the sun just rose and then got dressed. The maid helped the young king comb his long hair. Viserys sat at the desk and today's breakfast was placed in front of him. A few biscuits and half a piece of bread, a small dish of butter you can eat with biscuits, and a few slices of fried bacon to wrap on the bread. Viserys yawned while letting the beautiful maid help him comb his hair. At the same time, he reached out and picked up a biscuit and mashed it in the butter dish and then put it in his mouth. Crack, crunchy, so sleepy. Then the silver-haired boy complained weakly. In front of outsiders, he was the synonym of tenacity and genius. He became famous at a young age and turned the tide. However, when he was alone, Viserys would collapse in an instant and began to sigh. Although there was a wise King Daeron Targaryen second in the history of Targaryen, if the news of Viserys always working all night long spread, he would definitely be given the title of Wise King, especially this person who loves to stay up late and get up on time in the morning. However, who can blame Viserys for being in good spirits? 4 or 5 hours of sleep a day is enough. Viserys tasted his breakfast, and the maid's soft little hands massaged his scalp. His pair of lavender eyes fell on the silver-plated bronze mirror made by the craftsman from mirror in front of him. Then, a ball of black fog gradually emerged. As he grew older, Viserys' own attributes also naturally improved significantly, and the natural growth of his body did not seem to conflict with the existence of black fog. The black fog spread. In Viserys' vision, the whole house was wrapped in black fog, and as he absorbed more and more black fog, its volume continued to expand. Strength, Sun. 18 Constitution, Earth. 18 Agility, Water. 17 Spirit, Moon. 24 As Viserys grew older, his physical fitness began to improve rapidly, while his mental strength improved more slowly. After such a long time, even after several battles, he only improved 2 attributes. Viserys knew that, when each attribute reached 20, he would awaken an extraordinary ability. What would the next ability be? While Viserys was just observing his status, a guard came to report. Your Majesty, Ramsay wants to see you. Viserys, who was sitting on the chair, was slightly stunned, with a biscuit in his mouth. So early? He heard from the people who were placed next to Ramsay that the other party had only returned to Andlos in the early morning, but he had not slept for a while and came to see him. He is indeed a ruthless person, so ruthless to himself. The maid who was combing Viserys' hair also stopped her movements and bowed politely. Your Majesty, I will go down first. Viserys nodded, and then the maid consciously avoided him. Because everyone in the castle knew that Viserys didn't like people to listen to him when he was handling official business. Not too long passed. There were hurried footsteps in the corridor outside the door, and then a young man appeared in front of Viserys' bedroom. Your Majesty. Ramsay saw Viserys and knelt on the ground again, like a dog wagging its tail. Other people in the castle, including servants, would not do such a great ceremony when seeing Viserys, but only Ramsay insisted on doing so. But Viserys did not stop him, and he let him do it if he liked. Have you found out, Ramsay? Viserys sat on the chair without moving his butt, looking at the illegitimate son of the Earl of the Dreadfort kneeling on the ground, and spoke calmly. Ramsay looked a little tired now. His hair was messy, and his eyes were red and bloodshot. It was said that this guy had worked for 2 consecutive days without closing his eyes. Yes, Your Majesty, I have found out Pentos' intentions. Ramsay knelt on the ground and kowtowed respectfully several times, then took out a piece of intelligence from his arms, and stood up, and handed it to Viserys. Ramsay spent more than a month leading the 5 soldiers assigned to him by Viserys to boldly go deep into Pentos, and finally got the intelligence he wanted by unknown means. A few days ago, Viserys heard from his intelligence department that Odro, a governor of Pentos, was brutally tortured and killed in his mistress's home. It was a manor outside the city of Pentos, which Odro bought for his mistress. It is said that Odro and his mistress were all sunk into the well when they were found. The death was extremely miserable, and the bodies that were salvaged were not dead to look directly at. It is suspected that they were attacked by enemies. After all, Odro was able to climb from a wealthy businessman to the position of governor of Pentos. I don't know how much blood was stained on his hands, and the number of other merchants who were persecuted to death by him is countless. The people who investigated this matter believed that only those who deeply hated Odlo would be so cruel to him and would not take any of the other treasures in the manor. Viserys held this piece of information in his hand, and his fingers gently rubbed the bloodstains on the edge of the paper. "Thank you for your hard work." Then he raised his head and looked at Ramsay deeply, and then retracted his gaze and continued to read. Petty Baelish? Soon after, Viserys saw a familiar name and raised his eyebrows slightly. It turned out to be him. The figure with the short stature and dark hair mixed with a touch of grey appeared in his mind. As a conspiracy master who secretly stirred up the situation, he left a strong and colorful mark in this period of history. Viserys has always believed that anyone who can do this is definitely not a person who can be easily given. However, until now, this low-key little finger appeared in Viserys' field of vision for the first time. Where did he go next? Viserys asked. The young man standing aside with a gloomy face and his hands hanging down was slightly stunned. He didn't know why Viserys was particularly concerned about the whereabouts of this person, but even when he was in Westeros, he had never heard of this little nobleman on the Five Fingers Peninsula. Then Ramsay recalled that he had tracked this person at that time and wanted to catch him and torture him. However, when he found the place where Petty had stayed, he learned that this person had already left Pentos by boat. Ramsay told Viserys everything he knew without hiding anything. Chapter 185 Intention. Is that so? Viserys hesitated for a few seconds, then raised his head again. Find a chance to contact this person, considering that he and Lysa are still. However, Viserys hesitated, then thought for a moment and sighed. Forget it, it's not the right time yet. You can keep a close eye on this person, and he will be useful in the future. Littlefinger will play an important role in the future, but he is not yet so important. Viserys can secretly support him and make the water in Westeros more muddy. However, Petty Baelish does not have such ability now. He still needs to continue to cling to Jon Arryn like a maggot to absorb the blood of this old duke to strengthen himself. Understood. Although Ramsay did not know why Petty Baelish was valued by Viserys, he would regard everything his master said as an imperial decree and nodded hurriedly. Then Viserys did not explain why he did so, but continued to read on. Petty was sent by the Iron Throne to Pentos as a lobbyist and gave a passionate speech about the threat of Targaryen. Now that the Dragon King is by his side, the governors of Pentos have already felt a sense of crisis without Petty's words. After all, Pentos is the weakest of the 9 free trade cities. Because of the terms of defeat in the war with Bravos, although Pentos still has the power to maintain its sovereignty and independence, their warships may not exceed 20, and they may not hire mercenaries, sign contracts with free mercenary groups, or maintain any troops beyond the city guard. Despite its huge walls, Pentos is still considered the most vulnerable of the free trade cities. What's more, Pentos is now leaderless and its political system is in chaos. The head of the city-state, the Prince of Pentos, is just a puppet, and a group of wealthy governors who really control power are only concerned with their own interests, profit-seeking, and bullying the weak, and fearing the strong. Lacking a strong leader or a united collective will, Pentos is so weak that it needs to maintain a friendly attitude towards other free trade cities and Dothraki horse kings. Over the years, it has cultivated relationships with a series of powerful cows, giving them gifts and gold and silver to ensure that their cows are active east of the Rhoyne River and protect the safety of Pentos. Now a powerful force has suddenly risen around Pentos, the exiled royal family Targaryen who fled from Westeros to Essos. At first, Pentos didn't pay much attention to this little neighbor around it, but it didn't take long for this little neighbor to rise rapidly. Then it attracted the attention of Pentos, and it still used the previous routine to invite Viserys to visit and give gifts to win over the relationship. Then Viserys defeated a Dothraki horse king head-on in Gol Dohel, and there was news that his sister Daenerys hatched a dragon. All this changed again. Targaryen is not a Dothraki, they will not be uninterested in stone houses, and unlike the system of trading city-states, centralized kingdoms are naturally highly expansive. This is a viewpoint put forward by a scholar of the Citadel, based on the chaotic history of the 7 kingdoms before unification. This book also came here across the ocean. Therefore, Pentus gradually began to be wary and worried about this neighbor. Andalus is located in a land of abundance with its back to the sea and surrounded by mountains. It is surrounded by 3 free trade city-states, Bravus to the north, Norvus to the east, and Pentus to the west. Everyone knows that if you are content with the status quo, it will be fine. But if Viserys has the ambition to continue to expand, he must choose a direction to break through. Otherwise he will be locked in it. And if Targaryen really wants to choose a direction to expand, will he choose Bravus, which is blocked by the Hengduan Mountains and ranks first among the free trade city-states? Or will he choose Norvus, which is located in the mountains with complex terrain, has fanatical religious beliefs, and is protected by fearless bearded monks? I believe that anyone can easily choose this answer. Because of these reasons, everyone in Pentus was worried. The envoy from the Iron Throne came at the right time, so the governors of Pentus gathered together again to meet this envoy. The governors of Pentus met with petty. Viserys' lavender eyes sparkled with brilliance, and he knew that this was not a positive sign. Yes, your majesty. Ramsay still spoke respectfully. Petty persuaded the governors of Pentus to become your enemy and form an alliance with the Iron Throne. During this period, a governor named Illyrio Mopatus spoke out against it. He said that if Pentus became an enemy of the Targaryens, it might be attacked by dragons and Andalus. As for the surrounding trading cities, Bravus and Pentus are enemies. Pentus was forced to sign a humiliating treaty by the people of Bravus, while Norvus and Andalus have a friendly and harmonious relationship. Cotter is not enough to quench thirst. Tirosh and Lies have old grudges and are in opposition to each other. If one party rashly sends troops to help, it may lose the initiative in the disputed land. And war costs money. How much money will each of the governors present, and the 40 families of noble blood in Pentus pay to hire a trading city-state to fight this war? As for the Dothraki, they are a group of barbarians, and they are also very shrewd. They are willing to fight and suffer losses for money, but they may not be willing to intervene in this war. The mercenary group will tear up the truce with Bravus, and there is a high possibility of trouble in the future. How much does it cost to hire a mercenary group like the Golden Group with more than 10,000 people? How much does it cost to send a gift? Don't even think about supporting the Iron Throne. Winter is coming there, and they can't take care of themselves. Viserys nodded slightly. After listening to Ramsay's retelling, he held the intelligence in his hand, and his eyes showed a little scrutiny. Then he paused and continued to ask in a flat voice, "What's the result?" He needed to know the result of this matter. The result is that, although the governors of Pentus asked many questions about the plans for the Iron Throne, they did not agree to Petty Belish's lobbying in the end, and just said to think about it again. This was pried out by Ramsay from the poor governor of Pentus. Their attitude was very cautious, and inviting Viserys to Pentus was just to find out his true intentions now. Perhaps they would send another big gift, implement a policy of appeasement and increase the connection with Targaryen. However, besides that, they have another alternative plan. Another part of the Pentus governor is ambitious and has been eyeing your dragon for a long time. He supports this option. The two governors have not yet reached a final consensus. Chapter 186 Saints. That afternoon, Viserys appeared in the conference hall of the castle, but there was always one person missing here. The young king was wearing a casual dress and a golden crown, and sat in the main position in the middle, while the important people in power in Andalus sat on both sides of the long conference table. Then Viserys took out the plan that had been prepared last night about the division of the military system after the establishment of the kingdom, about the construction of emerging towns, and the reduction of a certain number of rural areas to build towns with a higher population density. Because of the special military system of Andalus, although the nobles have private soldiers to defend the castle, the number is not too large. All the standing legions in the entire kingdom are in the hands of the king or his designated commander. This is very different from the noble system of Westeros. The nobles only care about this piece of land and don't care about the troops stationed here. The power of the garrison general is equivalent to that of the local nobles, but this power cannot be inherited. In theory, the governance power of the local nobles is slightly higher than that of the garrison generals, but in reality, these military commanders are not much less powerful than the local nobles. Viserys naturally knew that such a system still had many flaws, such as the breeding of warlords, and the easy collusion between local nobles and generals. However, this was also a last resort, based on the current situation. At least compared with King Robert on the Iron Throne, he concentrated more power in his own hands. And the dragon was the best deterrent for Viserys to break the tradition and implement the new system. As long as there was a dragon, Viserys could tear up the original deep-rooted system as much as possible and increase the centralization of power as much as possible. Andalus was such a small place. Even if there was a problem on the border, there was a rebellion or collusion with local nobles, Viserys could ride a dragon to gather soldiers from other surrounding towns the next afternoon and airdrop to the top of the castle with great momentum. In this era, being ahead of others by one plane was still quite impressive. It seems that I will retire. Sir Geoffrey, with grey hair and wearing the medal of the king's hand, sat in the first seat on Viserys' left hand and shook his head slightly. I should have shared these things with his majesty, but, however, the old knight had nothing to teach him now, and his wrinkled old face was full of bitter smiles. Viserys had followed this old commander of the Dragonstone fleet for so many years, and with the old knight's deliberate teaching, Viserys followed him to learn how to lead troops and fight, and almost learned all his skills. In terms of politics, the old knight was originally a military man, and he knew nothing about governing a country and developing the economy, and he often even dragged his feet. He originally wanted to intervene in the development and construction of Andalus, fearing that Viserys would go the wrong way, but after a lot of busy work, he found that he seemed to be unable to help at all, but instead caused trouble everywhere. Now that the old man has handed over his military power and retired to the countryside, he once again feels powerless in the political situation. Listening to Viserys' explanation of the future development direction is like listening to a book of heaven. His face is full of confusion. Then I don't know how much time has passed. Bessie. Viserys looked at the person sitting at the end of the long conference table, and many people present looked over. His whole body was covered in thick clothes, and he wore a metal mask on his face. Except for his eyes under the mask, not a single bit of skin was exposed. His back was straight, like an ascetic monk in a temple. Bessie heard Viserys' voice, turned his head slightly, and looked at the king he swore allegiance to with his eyes under the mask. Your Majesty. The voice was low and hoarse. It took more than half a year for Bessie, a knight who had risen from a farm boy, to overcome the illness and stand up again. Except for his charred body that he didn't want to show to others, he was no different from an ordinary person. Of course, there was one more thing. That was that he really couldn't pick up a sword in this life, and couldn't fight like a knight, just as Gillian diagnosed at the beginning. However, Bessie begged Viserys to give him a chance. He didn't want to live in a daze for the rest of his life. In the end, Viserys gave him the command of part of the army. Afterwards, Bessie led these soldiers to eliminate the brotherhoods and bandits that were like weeds that could not be burned or cut off in the territory, and won victory after victory. In addition, he was strict in military discipline and had an orderly style of leading troops. He was like a monk who did not offend anyone wherever he went. In the end, he made a resounding name. Saint Bessie Joyce. The reason was naturally his piety and the belief of the 7 gods. The 7-pointed star symbol on the mask still reminded him all the time that he was a son of a warrior. The first legion is in your hands. The young king wore a golden crown on his head and then handed him a shining golden sword and shield medal in his hand. This is the medal representing the commander of the first legion. Bessie was a confidant who followed him to start from scratch and had been influenced by Viserys. There were not many people he could trust, but this loyal knight was definitely one of them. His loyalty to Viserys was as firm as his belief in the 7 gods. He was a tenacious and principled person. Moreover, Bessie's achievements in leading the troops during this period are obvious to all. She governs the army in a religious way. The whole army has a firm belief and fights bravely, and never offends anyone wherever they go. And this Legion of Andalus, numbered 1, is the first 4,000 elite Andal warriors who followed Viserys in the battles of the north and south. These Andal warriors are brave and good at fighting, and it is natural that Bessie, the son of a warrior, is the best person to lead them. Viserys handed the first Legion commander's medal to this iron-faced knight. The small sword made of pure gold shone brightly under the light, and sparse applause suddenly rang out in the conference hall. The Andalus high-level officials present applauded and congratulated this commander who was born from a civilian background. Congratulations. Aberin, who has always been frivolous and lazy, also became more serious this time, clapping his hands to congratulate Bessie. Aberin originally thought that he would become the first legion commander of Andalus, but he did not expect that this man who was younger than him, low-key, steady, and even unknown, would go ahead of him. I have no talent or virtue, and I'm unworthy of this. The knight wearing the metal mask had no emotion in his eyes. However, he still stood up. Because of the changes in his body, the action of standing up looked a little awkward, and then he bowed slightly. Thank you for your trust, Your Majesty. Chapter 187 Princess Dawn. After the first legion commander was appointed, Aberin was next in line. This Prince of Dawn had put aside his status and stayed in Andalus, making great military achievements. Naturally, he was qualified to be a legion commander, and he had resigned from the position of commander of the city guard. These had been agreed upon long ago, so Aberin knew that he would definitely be a legion commander. Viserys gave him the army of the Rhoynar that was later conquered. Aberin himself also had Rhoynar blood, and his ancestors came from the ancient Rhoynar city-state that was defeated by the Valyrian Freehold. The legendary heroine of the Rhoynar, Nymeria, married Mors Mortal and helped her husband conquer the entire Dawn. Therefore, it was perfect for Aberin to lead these kneeling Rhoynar armies, and Evan Perth, a Rhoynar general who was a confidant of Viserys, served as a deputy legion commander to help Aberin manage the entire 2nd Legion. Prince Aberin, the 2nd Legion is now in your hands. Viserys also took out a golden sword and shield medal and handed it to Aberin. The 2nd Legion. Your Majesty, this name is too ugly. The Prince of Dawn, who had black curly hair, crossed his legs, touched the soft beard on his chin with one hand, and shook his head helplessly. Aberin was very knowledgeable and had rich artistic cells. It was difficult for him to look down on this simple digital number. The 2nd Legion is just the serial number 2. Viserys looked at Aberin, not knowing what he was thinking about every day, and then spoke calmly. The number will not change. You can call it another name in the future, as long as it is not called Sweetheart Legion or Mortal Legion. Viserys finally made a small joke, and Aberin also grinned and showed a hearty smile. No problem. Don't worry, I won't give it such a bad name. Aberin took the golden sword and shield medal from Viserys and put it on his chest. This fresh experience gave Aberin a strong enthusiasm. After all, although Dawn's customs are slightly different from those of other places in Westeros, it has never had such a different system. The nobles are only responsible for governing the territory and cannot be in charge of the army in the territory. The nobles can become commanders of the army, but they are based on their abilities rather than titles, and they are not allowed to serve in their own territories. At the same time, they must accept regular reports and rotations. Moreover, the income in the territory is closely related to the interests of the nobles themselves. If the governance is neglected for a long time, or even the people are living in poverty, the king has the power to take back part of the nobles' land as a warning according to the highest ruling power, and even make them civilians. The worst case is that they will be sent to the gallows. Although the power of the country is highly centralized in the hands of the king in the end, and the power of the nobles' autonomy has been greatly suppressed, Aberin can see that this is more beneficial than harmful to the development of the country. Especially when the country is still in its infancy, one voice can unite everyone and reduce the energy of internal strife. As for whether this system will be copied to Westeros in the future, Viserys promised Prince Doran that Dawn will remain as it is now, maintaining a special and transcendent status. In fact, since Dawn surrendered to the Targaryen dynasty and later the Baratheon dynasty, Dawn has always maintained a special status. Historically, Targaryen and Dawn have married many times to consolidate this important border ruler. Therefore, there is no problem with Viserys' promise to Prince Doran, but Prince Doran insisted on promoting the marriage between his daughter and Viserys, perhaps not just to strengthen this kind of alliance relationship. At this time, Viserys suddenly thought of what happened more than half a month ago. Prince Doran suddenly sent a letter. In order to promote the marriage of the alliance between the two sides, his daughter Arianne Martell has boarded the ship from Sunspear to Andalus, and she was accompanied by 50 elite Dawn guards for protection. as well as a dozen craftsmen and artisans who funded Andalus. Aberin, how long will it take for the Dawn Princess to arrive? Viserys asked, and Aberin raised his eyebrows slightly when he heard Viserys' question, and thought for a while. Probably more than 2 months. Sunspear City is thousands of miles away from Andalus, and it takes a long time to travel by sea. Your Majesty, what's wrong? A bit nervous? Then the middle-aged man with slightly dark skin sat on the chair and teased in a teasing tone. He still remembered how he looked when he first met Viserys. And Viserys' face also turned a little dark, and then he responded unhappily. No. In fact, although Viserys can be serious sometimes, he is still a very easygoing person most of the time, and he never deliberately puts on the airs of a king. Because Viserys often says that a respected king does not rely on his noble blood, although everyone present does not have noble blood like him. To rule a country, one should rely on the support of the people and the nobles. If one only has noble blood, but no power to rule a country, such a person is just like his father, Mad King Aerys II, or King Robert who sits on the Iron Throne now. No matter how noble the blood is, one is destined to lose the chair under his buttocks or even his life. Haha. After such a small episode, the serious atmosphere in the conference hall suddenly became relaxed, and all the old men present showed a smile of understanding. Thinking carefully, their king is only a 15-year-old boy now. He will be considered an adult after his 16th name day and the coming of age ceremony next year. But sometimes Viserys' maturity and stability almost make them forget that he is still a boy. Just a novice. Your Majesty is indeed at the age to be engaged. The old knight sitting on the left-hand side of the king had a gratified smile on his face. He felt like watching his own child grow up. Although he was unmarried all his life, a sense of accomplishment surged in his heart. The eldest daughter of Prince Doran of the Martell family is a perfect match for the king. The marriage between the Targaryens and the Martells is a family tradition, not to mention that she is the eldest daughter of Prince Doran, so naturally there is nothing wrong with it. Yes. The old knight was the first to speak, and immediately all kinds of voices of approval rang out in the conference hall. Only Bessie Joyce, the newly appointed commander of the 1st Legion, who was sitting in the corner, did not speak in agreement. He still stood up straight and sat upright. He would only agree with the king's orders and not others. Chapter 188, Deserted Mountain Camp. Viserys looked at the ministers who were making a fuss and shook his head helplessly. He had been very resistant to the engagement with Princess Martell, based on some preconceived notions, but when he thought about it carefully, Irian was still just a little girl, not the restless woman who intended to support Myrcella to stir up the turmoil in Dawn. Moreover, this political marriage happened to be very important to the Targaryen family. Viserys had received many favors from Dawn for so many years, and he also needed such a strong ally to support him. If the two sides could marry, then this covenant would become even more unbreakable. In the future, whether it was a pincer attack from the north and the south or a landing from Dawn, it would play a vital role. What to do? Viserys had some headaches. However, compared with his original idealism, Viserys, who had suffered countless realistic blows over the years, became much more practical. Let's meet this Princess of Dawn first. Thinking of this, Viserys shook his head slightly, resting his hands on the table. His lavender eyes swept across the cheeks of everyone present, and then he smacked his lips and said, "Let's discuss this matter after Princess Irian arrives. Now let's get on with business. Our next plan is to build 2 castles, a camp, and a town." The castles and camps planned by Viserys were all lands that could be freely used in advance, and they would also be assets of the Targaryen royal family when they were built in the future. Then Viserys asked the guards to bring the map over, unfolded the map, and spread it on the table so that everyone in the conference hall could see it clearly. This is a map of the west coast of Essos with Andalus as a center, reaching Norvus in the east and the Great Plains in the south. Then Viserys pointed to the ancient road that went from the coast of Bravos to the Bay of Hilorus. The ancient road is located east of the Upper Oin River, where the Hengduin Mountains and the Norvus Mountains meet. If you continue to go east from here, you can reach the Bay of Loras, or even bypass the Norvus Mountains to reach the Battle Axe Cape. It is a suitable road for marching. Build a permanent camp from here. Viserys pointed at the only pass between the 2 mountains, and then spoke seriously. Aberon's army is stationed here. The location of this pass is crucial, especially for a city-state like Andalus without a wall. This pass is not far from Andalus. The establishment of a permanent camp by the army stationed here can play an important role in strengthening the border defense and setting up checkpoints to check the goods coming and going. In fact, the Andalus army is now stationed there, which is a plan that the top leaders have agreed on before. Understood. As the commander-in-chief of the 2nd Legion, Oberyn had just put on the medal of the Legion commander and then nodded slightly, but he was quick-witted and asked another question. Your Majesty, is the purpose of building a permanent camp here to guard against Novus? This mountain pass is blocked on the road leading to Novus, so Oberyn asked this question. No. Viserys shook his head slightly and said seriously. To guard against Bravus. Oberyn was stunned when he heard Viserys' words, and then lowered his head and stared at the map in front of him with wide eyes. After a while, the smart Oberyn seemed to finally see the clues and understood Viserys' true intentions. So that's it. Will Bravus turn against us? Oberyn asked with his eyes fixed. I don't know. But the necessary preparations should be made in advance. Viserys spoke without looking up at the map on the table and did not see Oberyn's bitter smile. Then he pointed to another completely opposite direction. This is the location of Andalus Port, which is also the port where the Dragonstone fleet is now docked. Build a large town here. Viserys decided to vigorously develop this town, introduce a large number of people, develop economic trade and enhance potential. After all, the port here naturally has the advantage of waterways. If you want to go to the caravan of Novus, this place may be closer than Pentus. Everyone in the royal meeting nodded slightly, and this idea was also within their expectations. Because this port has gradually begun to rise with the development of Andalus, merchant ships docked, caravans traveled, supplies, etc. Naturally, there are villagers around to gather to do business with these caravans and merchant ships, and with the investment of wealthy businessmen, they began to spontaneously build a small town. And what Viserys has to do is to tilt more policies and funds and take out a sum of money from the royal treasury to build this town. In the future, it will become an important part of the Targaryen royal assets. This is a meritorious cause that will benefit the future. The plan for a camp and a town has been completed, and finally only the 2 castles that Viserys plans to build are left. The first castle is here. Viserys pointed to the end west of the Velvet Mountains. This is one of the 2 roads from Andalus to Pentus. One is to take a boat down the Upper Oin River, disembark at the 3 Forks, and then take the land route directly to Pentus. The second flat road, that goes directly from Andalus to Pentus is here, bypassing the plains west of the Velvet Mountains. The place where Viserys pointed now is exactly the strategic location. If you look at the terrain of the entire west coast of Essos, it is a sharp corner protruding outward, and its sharp point points directly to the direction of Dragonstone and King's Landing. Build a sentinel tower here to detect possible raids by Stannis from the sea. Stannis' royal fleet is now Viserys' biggest enemy. After all, the other party is a famous general who rose in the War of the Usurper and defeated the Dragonstone fleet. The sentinel tower that is being planned to be built now is actually like a watchtower or a beacon tower. There is a castle below, with a garrison and a small military port. Ships patrolling the sea area can be on guard against sudden enemies coming from the other side of the narrow sea. And the second one is here. Then Viserys pointed to the ruins of Goldohol, on the banks of the 3 Forks, where a great battle had once broken out. Viserys reached out to this place during his previous expansion, and then decided to use this abandoned city-state to build a castle here. Build a fort of heroes here, to commemorate the heroes who once stubbornly resisted the invasion of the Dothraki. Chapter 189, Heroic Soul Castle. Bessie. After talking about the specific planned locations of the 2 castles, Viserys spoke. Your Majesty. When the king called him, the Iron Knight, who had been silent all this time, turned his head, and his smooth mask reflected the metallic light under the light, and then spoke in a hoarse voice. Your first legion is stationed here at Engelhard. Understood. The legion commander, who was given the title of saint by the soldiers, did not hesitate at all, and even agreed directly without frowning. Your Majesty. When the other people in the royal meeting heard Viserys' arrangement, their faces changed color, and even Melisandre, The priestess of the red god showed a little puzzlement on her face. They were not worried that Viserys would send both legions out, which would make the border strong and the center empty. In fact, the two legions left Andalus, but Andalus's military strength was not empty. Viserys still had a considerable force in his hands, and he had exchanged power with a Barin, and 2,000 city guards were now assigned to the old knight. They were worried about another problem. Won't this irritate Pentus too much? Except for Bessie, other people thought that Viserys' arrangement had almost put a sword on Pentus' neck, as if forcing Pentus to fall to the side of the Iron Throne. What does His Majesty want to do? Now the news that Ramsay brought back from Pentus has not been made public in the royal meeting. They only know that Pentus had sent a letter not long ago to invite Viserys to visit Pentus to celebrate the arrival of the new year. Pentus will hold a grand banquet at that time, and will also invite many distinguished guests to come and celebrate the whole city. Now it's not long before the day is up. Does His Majesty want to warn Pentus not to act rashly through such an action? The old knight wearing the medal of the Prime Minister frowned and said, if this is the explanation, it makes sense. As a kingdom, there are only two ways to deal with unstable forces around. One is to knock, and the other is to win over. Viserys just chose the method of knocking, but the money spent seems to be no less than that of winning over, and even more. After all, the construction of the Castle of Sol is a big project. If it can be built, it will really become a strategic location, holding the lifeline of Pentus and Norvus. Moreover, if you want to attack Andalus along the waterway of the Rhine River in the future, you need to cross this strong fortress that is easy to defend and difficult to attack. From this point of view, this is definitely a wise move. However, the idea is easy, and the money is worth spending. However, the difficulty of the Castle of Sol lies in the pressure it bears, and whether it can be built successfully. After all, this castle is too threatening to Pentus, and Pentus will certainly not allow Andalus to start building a castle here. One east and one west. There is also a sentinel castle on the other side to monitor the sea, which can pose a serious strategic threat to Pentus. If the construction is completed in the next few years, Andalus may give an order at any time to cut off all contact between Pentus and the outside world by land and sea, and directly surround this majestic city and turn it into an isolated island. Deterrence? Warning? The people in the royal meeting whispered and speculated on the king's intention of making such an arrangement. Melisandre's beautiful eyes also turned around Viserys, as if she wanted to know what he was thinking. Viserys supported his hands on the table, and his eyes swept over everyone present, but did not rush to explain anything. Then when all the whispers were quiet, Viserys took out the intelligence obtained by Ramsay, and threw it on the table. Take a look. Although the incident with the Maester had happened before, there was no better way, except to guard against it, and reuse the Ministry of Internal Affairs to eliminate spies. Now those present are the people Viserys trusts the most, so he took out this secret intelligence. Ramsay gave two possibilities in the intelligence summary. The governors of Pentus have now divided into two factions. One faction advocates a policy of appeasement, and continues to send gifts to Viserys to satisfy the greedy appetite of this evil dragon. The other faction advocates an alliance with the Iron Throne to eliminate this possible threat in a timely manner. At the same time, it is heard that the three dragons of Targaryen are still in their infancy. If Viserys can be captured and threatened to hand over the three dragons, Pentus will have the confidence to tear up the unequal treaty in the future and reorganize the fleet to seek revenge on Bravos. The two factions have their own reasons, but one side is conservative and the other side is radical. The two sides are evenly matched, and it is difficult to say who has the upper hand. The governor who was murdered by Ramsay was a member of the Conservatives and stood on the side of Governor Illyrio, so now the Conservatives are likely to be at a disadvantage. Ramsay's advice to Viserys is not to attend this celebration, because this is likely to become a case of rat chef who tramples on the rights of guests. This is a famous horror story that has been circulating in Westeros for a long time. It is enough to make children stop crying. It tells about trampling on the rights of guests. Ramsay used this story to remind Viserys that the governors of Pentus were also unscrupulous people who could reach this point. They might invite Viserys to Pentus and suddenly control him, forcing him to hand over the dragon. What? After everyone presented Ramsay's information, it immediately set off a storm. Is there such a thing? Everyone couldn't believe that the governors of Pentus dared to trample on the rights of guests. If they really did this, Pentus's reputation would be ruined. Killing guests under their own roof is a sin that the gods will never forgive. Pentus dared to do such a thing. The old knight was furious and clenched his fists. However, if you think about it carefully, under such a powerful temptation of the dragon, it seems that it is not impossible for these governors of Pentus to really do irrational things. Pentus is not a wise choice. And Oberyn also frowned slightly. If Pentus really sided with the Iron Throne, Andalus' southern border would naturally be under pressure. It was natural for Viserys to make such a deployment. He mobilized the 1st Legion to be stationed in Gordho and built the Castle of Hell to guard against sudden attacks from Pentus. And actively trampling on the rights of guests is tantamount to. Oberyn frowned, then raised his head to look at Viserys and spoke abruptly. Then will your majesty still go to Pentus on this trip? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190, Risky Move. Your Majesty, of course, cannot go. As soon as Oberyn finished speaking, someone spoke up. Since Pentus has connections with the usurper and intends to trample on the rights of guests, why go? Wouldn't that put the king in danger? Your Majesty, you are worth a lot of money and you absolutely cannot take such a risk. The conference room was suddenly noisy, and the other people nodded in agreement with this person's point of view. If they didn't know, it would be fine. Since they had already found out that Pentus had bad intentions, they must not put themselves in danger. However, Oberyn did not speak. He raised his head and looked at Viserys with the information in his hand. His thinking was different from the others, and coupled with Viserys' arrangement just now, it seemed that he had vaguely guessed his true intentions. Sure enough, Oberyn looked at Viserys, and Viserys had a calm face and listened to the noise of everyone around him, showing a thoughtful expression, and did not rush to speak. Then, when everyone shut up and looked at him, he nodded slightly and spoke in a calm tone. Go. Why not? The answer given by Viserys surprised everyone present, except Oberyn and Bessie. I dared to go to Bravos alone when I was 8 years old. Why don't I dare to go to Pentus now? Are you getting worse as you grow older? But many ministers looked at each other, wanting to say that these two were not the same problem at all, but they opened their mouths, but didn't say it. Besides, there are half-conservative governors. Things may not develop in a bad direction. Viserys smiled, and then slowly restrained himself. Oberyn had already made up his mind, and felt that this boy had changed dramatically over the years. Thinking back to the first time he met Viserys, the boy fell asleep in the bath, because he was too tired. When he opened his eyes, he saw a stranger. His eyes were full of panic, but he still clenched his fists, and pretended to be calm. He is not brave. Just brave. For some reason, a sentence from a ballad suddenly flashed in Oberyn's mind. It was a story about a wandering knight, who set out alone. The afternoon meeting ended quickly. Viserys did not ask them to stay for dinner. After the meeting, Oberyn was waiting for him outside the door as expected. Would you like to walk together? Oberyn's figure was slender, thin waist and broad shoulders, and his figure looked very perfect. He had messy black curly hair and a light beard. Then he raised his chin slightly. Okay. Viserys was not surprised that Oberyn was waiting for him at the door, and nodded immediately. There is a garden in Andalus Castle. Although there are no rare and precious varieties planted, it can also provide a touch of bright color. It's just that the weather has been getting colder recently. Although the continent of Essos is not adjacent to the land of eternal winter, the cold wind blowing southward is still inevitably affected. Now many flowers in the garden have withered. But the two men did not really come to appreciate the flowers. This was just an opportunity to have a private conversation. Your Majesty, Prince. The servants passing by saw the two people walking side by side in the garden, bowed slightly, and then hurried away without disturbing them. Your move is a risky one, Viserys. Are you sure Pentus will be fooled? And what if it fails? The sun was setting. The sky was blood red, like the color of the magic weapon. The two people walked side by side in the garden, and their shadows fell on the smooth marble slabs in the garden. The 15-year-old Viserys was only a little shorter than Oberyn. Then it was the Prince of Dawn who took the initiative to break the silence, turned his head, and looked at Viserys and spoke. Viserys and Oberyn can be regarded as a pair of friends regardless of age, with a difference of more than 10 years in age between the two. But it is interesting that the two people actually have common topics, and sometimes they have some wild ideas to talk about together, and then they become friends. Oberyn would call Viserys Your Majesty in official occasions, and call him by his name in private, and Viserys had no objection to this. Risky move. Viserys turned his head and looked at Oberyn. He knew that Oberyn's worry was not unreasonable. If it was just from the surface, it was indeed a risky behavior, but this is not a risky move, Oberyn. He was not surprised that Oberyn could guess his intention. After all, the two had known each other for so long, and from the beginning Oberyn did not treat him as a child, but as an adult. In addition, this guy's brain was indeed smarter than others. He was worthy of being a person who had obtained 6 Meester links. Oberyn could guess Viserys' thoughts most of the time. However, it was a pity that this guy died in the original trajectory. The mountain was not scary. Viserys never regarded the mountain as an opponent, even if his hands were stained with Targaryen blood. For such a reckless man, Viserys could kill him by arranging dozens of soldiers or digging a trap. The people that Viserys really regarded as his biggest enemies were Robert, Stannis, Tywin Lannister, Eddard Stark, Randyll Tarly, etc. A guy who could obviously make a living with his brain had to fight one-on-one with the most evil man in the 7 kingdoms. Viserys looked up at Oberyn, but his eyes made Oberyn feel cold all over. What? Prince Dawn couldn't help but scratch his hair slightly, a little confused. However, Viserys didn't explain much to Oberyn, just shook his head. Oberyn, I never joke with my life. I'm more afraid of death than many people. Since I dare to do this, I must have a reason to do so. He knew that this trip to Pentos might be dangerous, and he was even a little nervous. However, he was still willing to try bravely. After all, this is the best way to continue to break through. If you don't seize this opportunity, it will be extremely difficult to make any progress next time. Winter is coming. This is the best opportunity. Oberyn, believe me. The cold wind in the garden was blowing, and Viserys smiled. Really? Oberyn was a little confused. He was still immersed in the look Viserys had just given him. It felt like he was looking at a dead person. What was going on? Oberyn stopped in the garden, confused, and looked at Viserys' back as he walked away. Chapter 191 Dinner. After dusk, night came quickly. Dinner was still a Targaryen family dinner. Daenerys, whose hair and eyebrows were burned off by fire, has now grown back her hair, so she took off the hat that had been on her head. Now the girl has soft short silver gold hair and looks heroic. She sat on the right side of the long table in the banquet hall, and opposite her was her niece Rhaenys Targaryen, who was 4 years older than her, although the girl always had to call Rhaenys her sister due to some kind of power. Sitting at the main seat at the table was Viserys, and now his seat was empty. It seemed that Viserys was late today. The girl with long brown hair was leaning on her cheek with one hand, seeming a little depressed. Then there was a noisy voice outside the door, and a steady sound of footsteps. Your Majesty. The maid saluted respectfully, then pushed open the door of the banquet hall, and the young king strode in from outside. Viserys was a little busy with official business today. He stayed up late last night to summarize the plan that had been in place for a long time, and made a detailed plan. In the morning, they dealt with the intelligence brought by Ramsay. In the afternoon, they had to hold a royal meeting in the name of the king. They didn't even eat a few bites for lunch, and they were already hungry after a whole day. Hey, Rhaenys, Dany, I'm sorry I'm late. Viserys hurriedly walked in from the door and apologized to the two girls first. Then he put the coat hanging on his elbow on the back of the chair, and the maid who was serving beside him hurriedly took it and helped the king to tidy up the clothes and hang them on the hanger. I'm so hungry, let's eat quickly. The little girl with silver hair lying on the table saw that her brother finally came and quickly climbed up, her eyebrows dancing happily, and she raised the knife and fork in her hand like cheering. She was already hungry. However, they always had a small rule, that is, the family must be together before eating, except when someone is out. The brown-haired girl sitting on the other side of the table snorted for some reason, as if expressing some kind of dissatisfaction. Then the girl's black eyes swept across Dinah's, who was holding a knife and fork across from her, and then she spoke in a stiff tone. "Danny, have I ever told you that knives and forks are not toys? You can't move them except when eating." Although Renus usually laughs and is heartless, she still has a certain deterrent effect when she criticizes people seriously, especially for Dinah's, who was raised by her since childhood. The silver-haired girl immediately shrank her neck slightly, and her eyebrows could not dance anymore, and she quickly put down the knife and fork in her hand. However, she still muttered unwillingly, Now we just need to eat." Then Dinah saw the brown-haired girl's face sullen, and the light in her eyes became more and more dangerous. She decisively raised her hand to cover her mouth and pointed her finger, telling her that she would never speak again. Renus then retracted her gaze. Viserys had just taken off his coat and stood by the chair, looking at the scene in front of him, and was slightly stunned, as if he didn't understand what was going on. Then the silver-haired boy pulled out a chair and sat on it, and then pulled the chair forward. "What? Who made our respected princess angry?" Viserys was a little confused. Usually, Renus was an extremely optimistic girl, even letting herself go. She had lived a carefree life since she was a child, not to mention in this castle. Who else dared to bully her except himself? However, when he thought of this, the silver-haired boy was suddenly stunned. No. Renus hummed softly in response to Viserys' question, and denied it firmly, and then stared at Viserys' eyes with a gloomy face, and emphasized it word by word. No. Person. This. Viserys felt a little numb in the face of the girl's gaze, but he didn't know what happened specifically. When did he offend this little ancestor of his family? Then the young king, who was commanding the outside world, took a deep breath, and was about to say something. Then he was rudely interrupted by the brown-haired girl. "Let's eat first." After saying that, Renus ate her dinner by herself. Viserys glanced at Daenerys, who was also confused on the other side. She didn't seem to know what happened. Renus seemed to be in a bit of a bad mood today. Then the little silver-haired girl felt a fiery gaze fiercely on her cheek. She shuddered and quickly picked up the knife and fork to taste today's dinner. Today's dinner at the Targaryen family is quite rich. A cut honey roasted chicken, a plate of grilled sausages, bread, lettuce leaves, broth, and boiled eggs. Because they still need to grow, Viserys encourages girls to eat more milk and eggs to supplement protein. The atmosphere of today's dinner is a bit strange and silent. Viserys winked at the servants beside him and asked them to leave first. Soon, there was only a family with Targaryen blood in the whole house. Viserys carefully used his fork to pick up a piece of chicken and was about to move it to his plate, but a fork suddenly came over and snatched it away halfway. There was a sound of metal collision on the table, and the chicken on Viserys' fork was knocked off. Then the fork quickly took the chicken that Viserys had set his eyes on and stuffed it into his mouth. Viserys sat in his seat and stared at the empty fork for a few seconds. Then he turned his head and stared blankly at the girl, who was chewing the chicken with a gloomy face. Her bulging cheeks were filled with chicken, as if she was chewing Viserys' meat. Viserys took a deep breath, did not speak, and then retracted his gaze to continue looking for the next piece of prey on the plate. However, at this moment, ding, the sound of the knife and fork hitting the plate rang again in the silent room. Daenerys lowered her head to eat her dinner, almost burying her little face in the plate, and not daring to look up, for fear of accidentally angering the angry tigress. Viserys finally understood that the girl was just trying to create some presence by making noises here, so that he could speak first. However, before Viserys could speak, the girl, who was chewing roast chicken and frowning, locked her eyes on Viserys. After hesitating for a moment, she pouted and spoke first. "Viserys, I heard that a princess from Dawn is coming." Chapter 192, Gatter Keeping. After hearing what Renus said, Viserys was slightly stunned. He didn't expect Renus to be angry about this matter. However, he realized another problem immediately. "Wait, how did you know?" Viserys looked at the brown-haired girl with a surprised face. He only mentioned this matter at the royal conference. After all, many people already knew about the alliance between Dawn and Indolus, but it had not been made public, and the Iron Throne did not break up with Dawn because of this. After all, the greatest role of politics is compromise and exchange, and nothing can be sacrificed. As for the ministers in the royal conference, not to mention that Viserys believed that they were all clean, the Ministry of Internal Affairs led by Ramsay could find out their problems in other aspects, but they definitely had no connection with the Iron Throne. Even if there were spies from the Iron Throne, they would not leak this news to a little girl like Rhaenys. How did Rhaenys know? You sent someone to eavesdrop on the meeting? Did Rhaenys also cultivate her own confidants in the castle? Viserys couldn't help but think so. If that was true, he would have a new look at the brown-haired girl. HMPH. However, the girl hummed twice and swallowed the chicken. She picked up a grilled sausage with her fork and put it on the plate. She held the sausage with her left hand and cut the sausage with her right hand. Then she put it in her mouth and chewed it hard for a few times before she pouted and said, "No, I just heard it myself. At that time, I had something to find you, but you were in a meeting. I walked over, and the guards stopped me. But I insisted on going over, and in the end they had no choice but to let me go." All the guards and servants in the castle knew that Her Royal Highness the Princess was the hardest to mess with. She was simply a little devil, and now she was at an age where even dogs hated her. In comparison, Princess Daenerys was more gentle, polite, and lovely. The real owner of this castle was even more Buddhist. He had almost no rigid requirements for servants. He received a high salary every month, but actually had nothing to do. Therefore, the guards did not dare to stop Rhaenys. In addition, Rhaenys' special status made Viserys very fond of her, so it would not be a big deal to let her go. So, the brown-haired girl accidentally heard some explosive news. In fact, she had known a little about Aerion Martell earlier. After all, Rhaenys has half of her mother Elia Martell's blood in her body, and she is half a member of the Martell family. Her brown hair and black eyes are inherited from her mother. Aerion should be considered her cousin. A baron accidentally revealed this news when chatting with his niece before, asking Rhaenys to take care of her sister who came from afar in the future, and they may become a family in the future. However, a baron's expression was a little vague, and Rhaenys was confused at that time. It was not until she accidentally overheard this time that she understood the whole story. Oh, so that's how it is. Viserys was slightly relieved when he heard the girls mumbling. If that was the case, he would be relieved. Otherwise, he thought that he really couldn't keep any secrets here, and the guards would have to be cleared again. Viserys nodded, but Rhaenys was still quite dissatisfied. But she clenched her fists and didn't know how she should intervene in this matter, so she could only speak in a muffled tone. "Hey, Viserys, you haven't explained the matter of the Dawn Princess yet." "Well, this matter." Viserys looked at Rhaenys and was about to explain something, but was interrupted by Rhaenys again. "Don't think too much. I don't care whether you marry a princess or not. I just think as a member of the family, I should help you screen your future sister-in-law." Rhaenys turned her head with an unnatural look, glanced at the candlelight on the side, and then spoke. "Sister-in-law?" However, Viserys accurately caught the loophole in her words. But think about it carefully. Rhaenys is her niece, and Aerion is her cousin. Her sister-in-law is Rhaenys' mother and Aerion's aunt, and Aerion is the one who wants to enter into a marriage contract with her. What is the relationship? If Aerion can still see Elia, should she call her aunt or sister-in-law? Okay. Rhaenys was a little impatient to disrupt Viserys, and caught the loophole in her words. "I just think I should check for you. What do you think? What if she is not a good woman?" Rhaenys looked at Viserys with bright eyes, and Viserys also had a headache. What is Rhaenys checking for him? Viserys knew better than anyone what Aerion was like later, but now she was just a girl who was not much older than Rhaenys. "She is your sister," Viserys reminded kindly. If you don't let it go." Rhaenys' expression suddenly became a little gloomy when she heard his words. She glanced at Viserys and then retracted her gaze and whispered, "Even if I'm being sentimental." Okay. Viserys raised his hands in surrender as soon as he saw Rhaenys like this. He was most afraid of seeing Rhaenys like this, even more uncomfortable than her being a devil. "Whatever you want." Viserys sighed helplessly and shook his head, but then smiled again. He really didn't know what Rena's would be like when she grew up. Would she still be so lively and naughty? Or would she change? Then Viserys looked at the silver-haired little girl who had been a spectator on the other side. Daenerys didn't understand what the two were arguing about. Then he took another bite of the tasteless boiled egg in his hand. The yolk stuck to his teeth and rubbed a little on his nose, but the girl didn't notice it at all. Viserys reached out and wiped the yolk off his sister's nose, silent in his heart. He didn't know if Rhaenys would change. However, Daenerys did have a different personality when she grew up. She even became a little stubborn, even crazy, just like her father and Viserys in the original trajectory. But this may have something to do with the large amount of hallucinogens her mother Rhaela took when she was pregnant with her on Dragonstone. Maybe it is also related to the ups and downs of her life in the original trajectory. But it will never happen again in this life. Chapter 193 Departure. Then a period of time passed in a flash. The new year was coming. Andalus also celebrated the new year, while Pentos held a bigger feast. And they especially invited the young dragon lord who was exiled in Essos and had a claim to the Iron Throne, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, the son of the sun, the apostle of the seven gods, the guardian of Andalus, etc. This long list of titles almost covered the invitation. Pentos very solemnly invited Viserys to Pentos to attend the event, and Viserys did not refuse. Then, 1 month before he turned 16, he still took more than 100 knights and corresponding followers, archers, trumpeters, farriers, etc., and a whole cavalry of about 200 people set off for Pentos. This time, Viserys did not bring thousands of people to Pentos with great momentum, because his army had already arrived in Goldal one step ahead of time, ready to start building the Castle of Souls. Merchants traveling from Pentos to Norvus and Koha, and even daring to sell goods to the Dothraki Sea, have discovered that such a force with the Targaryen three-headed dragon flag is stationed here. Therefore, Viserys did not make a big fuss, but only set out from Andalus with more than 200 people to another city-state. However, there are a few more inconspicuous faces in his guard. Ramsay Snow, the illegitimate son of the Earl of the Dreadfort, is wearing a light leather armor, a black hood on his head, and riding a black horse to follow Viserys. Now the underground organization Ministry of Internal Affairs under his charge has expanded from 5 people to more than 20 subordinates. When these people are not on missions, they are mixed in the streets and alleys of Andalus, taverns and brothels, and even thieves, and scattered grassroots organizations. The grey area hidden under the light of this city is where information flows most frequently, and it is closer to the bottom. Because Ramsay had lived with Reek, he didn't mind the dirtiness, and he could even mingle with these rats in the ditch, calling each other brothers, and soon he established a territory in the grey area of Andalus. However, no one knew that this man with ruthless and even perverted means actually had the whitest identity, and even had direct access to the owner of the castle. This time, I don't know why Viserys brought the little skinner with him on his trip to Pentos. Ramsay wore a black hood, lowered his head, and it was almost difficult to see his cheeks. He followed Viserys silently, like a hound waiting for a target. Viserys sat on the horse and his body swayed slightly with the footsteps of the warhorse. A group of cavalry gathered on the left and right, and the long team spread far along the avenue. The team was not moving very fast, as if they were leisurely on a picnic. If the weather hadn't suddenly turned cold recently, the breath from the mouth would have turned into white mist, and if these soldiers weren't wearing armor and holding up their shining spears, it would have looked more like a group outing. Ramsay, have you done what I told you to do some time ago? Viserys, who was sitting on his horse and swaying leisurely, turned his head and said, yes, please rest assured. Ramsay's cheek was still hidden in the hood, but he just raised his head slightly, exhaled white mist from the hood, and his voice was a little hoarse. He will come to see you at the appointed time and place. Since taking on such a job, Ramsay feels that his ability has improved a lot, and he seems to have found a direction suitable for his development. He used to enjoy abusing people, hoping to prove to others that he was a real Bolton, rather than a lowly bastard through such cruel means. However, no matter how cruel and crazy Ramsay was at that time, no one would think he was a real Bolton. Instead, they all stayed away from him and regarded him as a disgusting monster. Ramsay was once in confusion. He didn't know how to go in the future. Perhaps as long as his brother was alive, he would never become a real Bolton. Ramsay found the real answer, but before he could implement his plan, he was sent to the other side of the sea by his father. Ramsay was very glad that he had fought for this opportunity at that time. His King Viserys Targaryen III gave him another correct path. At the beginning, he didn't know how to start, but until he found the right way, this path made him intoxicated. He liked this feeling, secretly monitoring, secretly eavesdropping, knowing all the secrets. The glamorous knights on the surface were disgusting beasts in secret, who could only arch their fat bodies on women's bellies. At that time, Ramsay stood quietly outside their window, looking at them calmly with a pair of eyes, just like watching the two pigs in the pigsty of his mother's childhood home mating. He liked the feeling of mastering all the secrets, and even the idea of being a real Bolton disappeared. Of course, it's not that he doesn't want to be a Bolton, but he hopes that one day in the future, the old man can kneel at his feet and beg him to become a Bolton. That scene must be very interesting. The gloomy face under the hood showed madness. Then, a few days passed in a flash. Viserys and his cavalry crossed most of the Ants Plain and came to an important turning point on the land, one of the two roads leading to Pentos. From the map, you can see that there is a sharp protrusion here, on the west side of Velvet Mountain. Viserys plans to start construction of a sentinel tower here, and a small military port at the same time, mainly to guard against the royal fleet across the narrow sea to launch a surprise attack. At this moment, the action here is faster than that of the Fort of Souls, mainly because the resistance here is not very large, and the threat to Pentos is not as direct as that of the Fort of Souls. The construction of the Fort of Souls is like a sword forcing Pentos' throat, while the Sentinel Tower is at best a chair move to sit at your door day and night and watch you. The threats of the two are different. And here, there was a large ship without any flags quietly docked on the coast, and it seemed that it had been waiting here for a long time. An old man with ragged clothes and grey hair stood quietly at the bow, holding the guardrail, looking at the cavalry team with three-headed dragon flags approaching in the distance like a long snake. Chapter 194 Arrival. In the 291st year of the Egan calendar, the new year has arrived. A heavy snow fell. In this white world, a team of cavalrymen wearing heavy armor and animal skins appeared on the road. The horses hoof stepped on the deep snow and slowly walked towards the magnificent city that appeared on the horizon in the distance. Your Majesty. In the flying snow, a guard following Viserys put his hands on the pergola to block the falling snowflakes, squinted his eyes, and tried to penetrate this white world, looking at the huge city looming in the distance, then turned his head and exhaled white air. Pentos is almost here. Viserys rode a white horse with thick deerskin gloves on his hands, holding the reins tightly, squinting his eyes slightly, and looking into the distance, and snowflakes fell on his long eyelashes. HMM. Then he pressed the saddle and turned his head. Everyone, work harder. I promise that we will have both wine and beauties when we reach Pentos. Haha. As soon as Viserys finished speaking, the soldiers in the team smiled, and their fatigue and coldness seemed to be swept away. Of course, they knew that Viserys was joking. However, such a down-to-earth young king made them feel more real and supported. He was like a scorching sun. His personal charm was too dazzling, causing everyone to actively unite around him, whether they were Andals or Oina. And he did not look down on others like those nobles, and even regarded them as pigs and dogs. The king can love the people like his own children, and sympathize with the soldiers, so why should those nobles whose territories are not even as big as villages look up to the sky? Viserys played a good leading role, and the nobles under him did not dare to be domineering. At least among the nobles around Andalus, if someone dared to cause trouble, there would be no need for the people to come to the castle to complain. His lord would hastily send him to the gallows, fearing that he would be implicated. Therefore, Viserys had a very high prestige among the people, and was portrayed as a perfect image in rumors. In addition, with the role of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, almost any news that spread in Andalus would appear on Viserys' desk the next day. Then a long cavalry team protected their king, and slowly ran towards the north gate of Pentos. The guards at the north gate of Pentos were not frightened by these knights with shining helmets, and shining blades stained with snow this time, which made a joke. Because they had received the news long ago, they cleared the city gate, and waited for Viserys. However, the problem of the Pentus guards being rotten from the root has not been solved. Viserys rode on the warhorse, and the white horse snorted slightly, spraying white mist. The Pentus guards standing below stood crookedly, their helmets were crooked, they kept yawning, and they had dark circles under their eyes, which showed that they had not slept well yesterday. Your Majesty, the governor wanted to greet you, but the snowstorm was too strong. The gate guard was a fat man with a greasy face, but he wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and explained nervously. In such weather, everyone else was shivering with cold, but his fat played an important role at this time. The city of Pentus was also heavily snowed. A heavy snowstorm last night directly crushed several houses and markets, causing the deaths of some civilians. Illyrio wanted to greet Viserys, but halfway there, the wheels of the carriage could not move because of the heavy snow, and there was a traffic jam, so he was a little late. It's okay, we can wait for Lord Illyrio. However, Viserys waved his hand and didn't care whether anyone greeted him. The snow on his head was still falling, and white air was exhaled from his mouth. He turned his gaze away from the white bustling city scene in the distance, and fell on the gate guards under his horse and the Pentus guards around him. His eyes narrowed and he smiled. Let's chat by the way. Then Viserys patted the saddle lightly, and turned off the horse's back, stepping on the snow. Your Majesty. A skinny Pentus guard was very considerate and hurriedly took the reins from Viserys' hand. The pot-bellied gate guard didn't know what Viserys wanted to talk to him about. He was panting after just 2 steps, constantly exhaling white air, and sweat was flowing down his forehead, showing how weak his body was. This kind of body is not even as good as a farm boy, let alone in the army. However, he became the guard of a gate in Pentus, an important position. Viserys was a little curious, and then he adjusted the deerskin gloves on his hands to shake off the snow, and then turned his head to ask. Let's chat for a while, don't be nervous. How is it? Being a city guard in such a rich city state as Pentus is a good job, right? Other city gate guard was a little nervous when chatting with Viserys alone, especially when he was stared at by those lavender eyes. This nervousness became even more serious. It's okay, it's okay. Just open the city gate every day, collect the toll, and then up. As a guard guarding the gate of Pentus, this is a lucrative job, especially as an important position as a city gate guard. His uncle is a wealthy merchant governor of Pentus, so he spent a lot of money to arrange him in such an important position. There are countless caravans coming and going at this gate every day. If any contraband is found, these city gate guards have the right to confiscate or seize the carriages of these caravans. Of course, if people who know what's interesting take the initiative to pay a little toll, they don't mind letting them in. Therefore, the garrison of Pentus is now highly corrupt, even comparable to the gold cloaks of King's Landing. However, the governors of Pentus do not intend to replace the current commander-in-chief of the garrison, because this is a result of mutual compromise, and the next commander-in-chief may be even worse. The gate guard knew that he had let the cat out of the bag. His face became more nervous, and he quickly covered his mouth. Next, Viserys asked nothing more and said nothing. However, Viserys did not care about it, but just smiled slightly. From the last time he came to Pentus to this time, he could probably figure out what the only regular army of the city-state has become. At this time, Illyrio, the governor of Pentus, who was stuck in traffic because of the snow in the morning, finally arrived in a carriage. The fat middle-aged man climbed down from the carriage panting, then came to Viserys and shook his hand. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. It snowed too heavily yesterday, and I didn't get here in time. Chapter 195 Killer. The rich merchant governor with the yellow, forked beard complained about the bad weather, and held Viserys' hand tightly. However, he looked around, and took the opportunity to lean forward slightly, while holding Viserys' hand. He whispered in Viserys' ear like a mosquito. Your Majesty, you shouldn't come to Pentus. Oh. Viserys raised his eyebrows when he heard his words, tilted his head slightly to look at the fat governor's ear, and his expression looked a little surprised. Then he responded in a low voice knowingly. What does the governor mean by this? Alas, however, Illyrio did not say much, just sighed and shook his head. Then he quickly let go of Viserys' hand and stretched out his hand to make a gesture of invitation. Your Majesty, let's go back and talk. Not long after, The cavalry led by Viserys entered the city of Pentus, holding high the flag, and passing through the wide streets of the city, attracting the attention of many Pentus people along the way. This is a prosperous and magnificent city, far more prosperous than Andalus, and even more prosperous than King's Landing. Square brick towers can be seen everywhere, most of which are covered with tiles. There are towering hills in the distance, surrounded by densely packed buildings. Now everything is covered in silver, and the heavy snow flying all over the sky is still falling down. Viserys rode on a warhorse, and the cavalry behind him walked through the crowd on the avenue, exhaling white air. The population of Pentus is very dense, and it is even said that it is more dense than a pasture in Slaver's Bay. Viserys' cavalry of more than 200 people entered Pentus like a small boat entering the sea, without any waves. The regular army, not mercenaries, marched through the streets and attracted the attention of many Pentus people, especially their bright red three-headed dragon flag. The Pentus people knew this emblem very well. They all knew that a powerful neighbor had risen around Pentus. They were the Targaryen royal family who had fled to the continent of Essos. They were the true bloodline of the king. Illyrio's carriage was leading the way in front, driving the crowds on both sides. After all, the governor's flag was more useful in Pentus than the Targaryen flag, and the people on both sides were also looking at them curiously. Viserys could see the bustling crowds on both sides while sitting on horseback. There were vendors pushing carts in the streets and fishermen shouting and selling fish barefoot. The cheeks of the young boys playing on the roof were tanned by the sun, and there were groups of mercenaries with weapons. Viserys even saw a few Dothraki. These Dothraki might be slaves of a wealthy businessman, or they might be people who had left their own tribe and decided to work alone. Such scenes can be seen almost everywhere. Pentus is indeed a giant city-state, with people from all walks of life and even all races from all regions and all corners of the country. There was also a small episode in the process. A wine merchant who was pulling a cart of wine barrels saw the three-headed dragon flag, then shouted the name of Targaryen, and blocked the army's way forward. The merchant claimed to be a man from the Reach, spoke fluent Westerosi common language, and even had a little King's Landing accent. He stopped the cavalry and claimed that he was loyal to the true king. The people of Westeros all hoped that Viserys would lead the army across the narrow sea as soon as possible and overthrow the rule of the usurper. Then he said he wanted to toast Viserys with a glass of wine. However, Viserys sat on the horse and held the reins, watching the wine merchant below calmly, looking at the glass of deep red wine held by the other party. His face did not fluctuate at all, and then he raised his chin to the soldier next to him. "Feed this glass of wine to him." Viserys spoke calmly. The surrounding soldiers, who were like wolves and tigers, pounced on him after hearing his order, and the wine merchant changed his face, drew a dagger from his waist, and wanted to break out of the siege. However, the guards around Viserys were naturally elites who had been carefully selected. They stabbed the merchant in the thigh with a sword, causing him to scream. Then they grabbed his wrist and disarmed the short sword in his hand. Two soldiers held his shoulders and grabbed his wrist and then kicked his knee and broke it. "Kaka," the wine merchant screamed, and cold sweat flowed down his forehead. Another soldier stepped forward and grabbed the man's chin, forcing him to open his mouth, holding the wine he was about to pour for Viserys. "Your Majesty?" The guard turned around and asked Viserys for his opinion. Viserys glanced at Illyrio, who had also gotten off the carriage. The other party did not expect the sudden change, and cold sweat flowed down his forehead, fearing that Viserys would have some misunderstandings. "This matter has nothing to do with me, Your Majesty." Then, feeling Viserys' gaze, the fat man nodded quickly. "This is a despicable act. Please do as you please." Viserys also nodded slightly. "Your Majesty, don't you want to interrogate him?" Ramsay, who was hiding behind his hood, suddenly asked, with a cruel light in his eyes. Not only did Viserys see it, but Ramsay just whispered to him behind his back. This crude assassination method can fool the innocent little girl. However, it is almost impossible to deceive Viserys and Ramsay's eyes. Forget it. Viserys shook his head slightly, and then looked around at the Pentus people who squeezed around to watch because of this incident. No matter which world, most people love to watch the excitement. This matter will spread soon, and interrogation will not reveal anything. The other party has already run away. Yes, you said. Ramsay obeyed Vizier's words and nodded slightly. Then he hid his appearance in the hood again, looked at the wine merchant and sneered twice. Then Viserys nodded to the soldier who had caught the assassin. He did not stop to look, and drove his horse away. The cup of spiked wine was roughly poured into his throat in front of the other party's horrified eyes. Not long after, the face of the man who claimed to be from the River Each turned red like blood and rolled on the ground. He desperately grabbed his throat until it bled, and finally kicked his legs and stopped moving. Seeing the reaction of the man, after drinking the wine, the crowd of onlookers was in an uproar. However, among these people, there was a man with an ordinary face and even a little bald head who witnessed the whole scene. Then he raised his head and looked at the back of Viserys in the distance with a complicated look. Chapter 196 The Immaculate. The matter of the wine merchant was just a small episode when Viserys entered the city of Pentus. When Viserys and his party arrived at Illyrio's courtyard, Ramsay, who had been following him, had disappeared without a trace. He disappeared in this huge city-state with a large population, just like a drop of water falling into the sea, perfectly blending in. And Illyrio naturally did not notice that there were a few people missing from Viserys' team, and warmly invited Viserys to enter his house. Viserys turned over and dismounted, and then handed the reins to a soldier wearing light armor, a short sword on his waist and a spiked helmet. The soldier's movements were concise and powerful, and his eyes had no other colors, like a precision machine without emotions. Viserys looked at the soldier a few more times with some curiosity. He remembered that he had not seen this kind of soldier when he came to Illyrio's courtyard last time. This seems to be Viserys felt a little familiar and almost blurted it out. Unsullied. The wealthy governor with the big belly came down from the carriage with a grunt. Then he saw Viserys looking at his guards for a few more times, and then he explained. Is this your first time seeing them? But it makes sense. These guys without long swords are all from Astapor, which is a bit far from Andalus. Illyrio laughed. So they are the Unsullied. Viserys' eyes showed some surprise. He just thought of it, but he still didn't dare to recognize it. This is a famous army on the continent of Essos. The Unsullied Legion has created countless miracles in the history of war. Even if they have never seen it, almost everyone knows that the Unsullied are the best soldiers. Because these slave warriors have been cruelly eliminated since childhood, only 1/3 of all slave children can pass the years of inhumane training. In the end, they become a real Unsullied, completely abandoning the emotions of a human being and becoming a pure killing machine. They would unconditionally carry out their master's orders, even if they were asked to chop off a hand or slit their necks on the spot. These Unsullied warriors had almost no disadvantages except for their high prices. However, the high prices were not the fault of the Unsullied warriors, but the money of the wealthy merchants who wanted to buy these warriors to protect themselves. Then Viserys looked at the soldiers back a few more times. The other party led his warhorse to the place outside the courtyard, where horses were specially stored, and then tied the rope meticulously, as if he didn't hear what Illyrio said. Then Viserys withdrew his gaze. Not bad. You are worthy of the famous Unsullied. Viserys was a little envious of such elite soldiers. It was almost impossible to achieve such an effect with conventional training. And Illyrio was still laughing, his yellow beard trembling, and his expression was a little proud. It was almost the highest level of deference to have Unsullied warriors guarding the house. A few days ago, a Pentus governor was killed in his manor outside the city. The guards he brought with him did not even realize that their master had been tortured to death. When the slave guards finally found out about this, they did not choose to inform others, but fled in a hurry. Because this governor still has a family, if his family finds out that their negligence caused the governor's death, they are afraid that they will not survive, so all the slaves fled in a hurry. However, before they escaped for 2 days, all the slaves were caught and buried alive with the governor who died tragically. Therefore, after this incident, all the governors and wealthy merchants in Pentus were in danger. At this time, Illyrio also bought a group of 100 Unsullied to strengthen the security of his courtyard, to prevent the tragedy from repeating. After returning to Pentus, he sold some of them to other governors at a higher price. Astapor stipulates that the purchase of Unsullied can only be divided into integer units such as 100 and 1000, because they need to be commanded by a command staff. All Unsullied are trained to recognize the staff, and not the person. After getting the staff, they may not hesitate, even if they are ordered to turn around and kill their master. If you are interested, I will give you 2 when you leave Pentus. Illyrio waved his hand and gave Viserys to Unsullied. Although these Unsullied are very expensive, he can still afford 2. No need. Viserys shook his head slightly. 2 Unsullied are useless, even worse than 2 battle-hardened mercenaries. Otherwise they would not have suffered many casualties when facing the Sons of the Harpy. However, fighting alone is indeed not the correct way to use the Unsullied. Only when they form a legion can the true strength of the Unsullied be brought into play. This kind of fearlessness, no matter how terrible the situation is, they will not change their face, still maintain the formation, and even when the last warrior dies, they can still bravely raise their spears and charge at the enemy. This is their most terrifying place. Please. Then Viserys and Illyrio came to the reception room. A little golden-haired maid made tea, glanced at Viserys secretly, her cheeks flushed, and then ran away quickly. This situation was actually not unexpected. Viserys had long been accustomed to it. He glanced at the shy figure of the girl running away, then retracted his gaze to look at the wealthy governor and spoke. Lord Illyrio, what did you mean by what you said just now in front of the city gate? Viserys did not continue to exchange pleasantries with Illyrio, but asked directly. When Illyrio heard that Viserys did not make any ambiguity, he nodded and went straight to the point. His greasy and fat cheeks gradually became serious. Well, maybe you don't know, Your Majesty. Illyrio's voice was hoarse, and his small eyes were full of seriousness. He even subconsciously lowered his voice when he spoke. Now some of the governors of Pentus have evil intentions towards you. He admitted everything directly, which was beyond Viserys' expectation. Viserys' eyebrows slightly raised. He had not expected this. He had thought that Illyrio would pretend to be ignorant. After all, no matter how close he was to the Targaryens, he was still the governor of Pentus, which involved his fundamental interests. However, Illyrio actually sold out his teammates like this? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197. Each has his own agenda. Illyrio then did not hide anything, and claimed to have told Viserys everything he knew. Viserys had no way of telling the truth from his words. However, there were indeed many contents that were not stated in Ramsay's intelligence. After all, no matter how powerful Ramsay was, he was not as terrible as an insider who sat directly in the position of governor. Andalus has grown too fast, and the most important thing is the dragon. No one will turn a blind eye to the dragon. Illyrio sighed and said, if possible, I don't know how many people are willing to give up their wealth in exchange for a dragon. When Andalus first rose, it did not attract too much attention from Pentus. Such small forces were almost as numerous as cattle hares, but later their attitude gradually began to change. However, at that time, Pentus also did not think about eradicating this restless neighbor, because they still wanted to use Andalus as a buffer between them and Bravus. But they never expected that the buffer would grow into a center. But all these were not the overwhelming conditions that led most of the governors of Pentus to decide to turn to the Iron Throne. In the end, it was still the dragon. The dragon was like a huge bait that aroused the desires of the governors of Pentus, especially the little dragons that had not grown up. No one would ignore the dragon. Unless he is blind. These governors of Pentus all started out as merchants. Which one of them is not ambitious and ruthless? The moment the news of the birth of the dragon came out, they wanted to get it. Especially since they were so close to the dragon that they could even smell the pungent sulfur smell when they breathed. Some people wanted to get it, while others wanted to protect themselves. The existence of dragons means expansion, and Pentus is the next target of the Andalus people. This is a consensus that almost everyone can reach. It's just a matter of sooner or later. Therefore, the two combined. Some wanted to get the dragon, and some wanted to protect themselves. They formed the largest radical faction among the governors of Pentus. and those who remained calm under the lobbying of the Iron Throne emissary became a minority. Illyrio Mopetus was one of them. During this period, the secret war surrounding this matter was staged every day in Pentus. More than a dozen governors had their own ulterior motives, and it was difficult to reach a consensus. Viserys arrived under such circumstances. How could such a thing happen? Viserys nodded. Although he had known it for a long time, he still pretended to know the news for the first time at this time, and there was more anger and fear on his handsome face. This is in line with the attitude that a normal person should show at this time. Especially for him, who is only 15 or 16 years old now, he can perform more seamlessly. What should people do when they are betrayed in a foreign country? Naturally, they should seek help from the people around them who they trust, and Viserys seems to be trying to stay calm, which is closer to the truth. Lord Illyrio, what should we do next? And this wealthy governor also looked a little sad, and finally shook his head and sighed, putting on a very embarrassed look. In fact, Your Majesty, I have always longed for Targaryen. I used to. Then, Illyrio told the story of his youth and expressed his ambitions in a veiled way. He confronted Viserys, hoping to help Viserys obtain the throne of the Seven Kingdoms and sit on the Iron Throne in the future, and in return he hoped to get a castle, a duke's title and the position of the new dynasty's finance minister. Viserys just narrowed his eyes slightly at Illyrio's sudden showdown, and gently pinched his 5 fingers. He did not rush to agree, nor did he immediately object. Although this was just a blank check at the moment, Viserys heard another question, which he had not thought of before. Sheriff from lies? Viserys asked. My lord governor, is your second wife a Valyrian? I don't know if it was to establish a relationship with Viserys, or for other reasons. When Illyrio talked about his past just now, he mentioned that he had a bad relationship with the previous Prince of Pentus. Because he married the cousin of the last Prince of Pentus, and after his first wife died, he married a prostitute named Silas, which angered the Prince of Pentus at the time. And the girl who came to lies had silver gold hair. Yes, Silas does have some Valyrian blood. Illyrio didn't know why Viserys asked such a question, and was a little confused, but nodded and admitted it. But there are many people with Valyrian blood in places like Lys and Volantis. Really? Viserys was relieved when he heard Illyrio's words and spoke casually. I thought your wife would be a descendant of Blackfire. Viserys' casual words made Illyrio's face change slightly, but before he could say anything, Viserys continued. But it's no big deal. Red dragons and black dragons are both dragons. Now that Targaryen has lost the Iron Throne, why do they still have to distinguish them so clearly? Viserys took a sip of the tea in the cup and shook his head, and Illyrio breathed a sigh of relief. There have been several Blackfire rebellions in Targaryen history. Although they are essentially a family, these Blackfires without formal identities have always been obsessed with obtaining the orthodox position, and this obsession has lasted for generations. Even the ancestors have been passed down, so several Blackfire wars broke out. If Shiller is recognized by Viserys as a descendant of Blackfire, then this cooperation will be over. But now it seems that Viserys doesn't seem to care whether it is a red dragon or a black dragon. Illyrio breathed a sigh of relief, but still smiled bitterly and explained. Shiller was just an ordinary Valyrian who died of a plague. She certainly wasn't a descendant of Blackfire. At that time, she was pregnant with my child. I have every confidence that it would be a boy. Illyrio's face was still a little gloomy and sad when he talked about the past. But he was not born into this world. That terrible plague took his and his mother's lives. However, the sad expression did not last long. Illyrio sighed, cheered up and got back to business. It may be too late to leave Pentus now, but things have not reached the worst point yet. I will do my best to help His Majesty out of trouble at the festival in 3 days. Illyrio wiped away the tears from the corners of his eyes with his sleeve, and then patted his chest to promise. In that case, I will leave it to the Lord Governor. And Viserys seemed very moved, and breathed a sigh of relief. He held Illyrio's hands tightly. Chapter 198 Surveillance. Viserys actually had doubts about Pentus's purpose before this trip, and had obtained accurate information. However, he was still willing to go on this trip in person, and of course he had his own purpose and arrangements. Of course, he did not tell the truth to this wealthy governor of Pentus. Illyrio's words were also half true and half false. He did not tell all the truth, but only said some unimportant things, and was careless about the key issues. Both of them were acting against each other, and they still looked at each other sincerely when shaking hands. Then when Viserys walked out of Illyrio's courtyard, the smile on his face had completely disappeared, and he returned to the calmness of an ancient well. Your Majesty, the 100 knights he brought this time, as well as the knights' squires, archers, and more than 200 people had been waiting here for a long time. Then Viserys took the horse brought by the Unsullied, stepped one foot on the stirrup, climbed on the horse, and held the reins with one hand. He took a last look at Illyrio's courtyard, and then turned his horse's head. Let's go. Viserys also has a mansion in Pentos. This was a gift from all the governors when he came to Pentos last time. The mansion is very large, and it is equipped with a water garden. There is definitely not enough room, but if they squeeze in and set up tents in the courtyard, it will be more than enough to accommodate 200 people. Tap, tap, tap. Then a group of knights who were flying under the Targaryen banner and swaggering through the city came to Viserys' mansion in Pentos. When they saw the flag of the three-headed dragon, countless spies secretly surrounding the mansion all focused their attention on it. Here we come, here we come. For a while, these spies were a little flustered. They each had their own masters. Some were from the governors of Pentos, and some were well-informed wealthy merchants. There was even a servant who was dressed in court clothes and did not make any disguises at all. At first glance, he was under the command of the Prince of Pentos, who had a name but no power. I don't know what he wanted to do by sending people here. Many spies came to watch Viserys, but Viserys seemed to ignore them and looked over without any worries. Because he knew very well that the governors of Pentos were still cautious. At least they did not dare to send people to kill him directly, otherwise they would be ambushed on the way to Pentos. However, these governors of Pentos did not dare to do so because of the reorganized cavalry team around Viserys, and there were legions behind him to support him. If you want to kill Viserys' 200 people and not let any of them live or leak any information, sending out 400 people is not enough. At least 600 or even 800 cavalry should be sent. However, it is impossible for Pentos to hide such a large number of cavalry from everyone. That would be equivalent to publicly ambushing Viserys. Violating the rights of guests is a sin that the gods cannot forgive, and the reputation of the people of Pentos will also be ruined. If the Dothraki were entrusted with this task, it would be too late. There were no Horse Kings active nearby, and even if there were Horse Kings who wanted to go west, they would be intercepted by the 1st Legion of Andalus stationed in Goldoha. Pentos did not dare to attack him directly. Therefore, Viserys dared to enter the city with great fanfare, not caring about how much noise he made along the way, so that everyone would know that he was coming. Although he was in danger all the time, just like the merchant who toasted him during the day, Viserys was not panicked, but was unusually calm. He knew that the more noise he made, and the more people knew about his arrival, the more cautious the governors of Pentos would be, and they would not dare to act easily. The more obstacles he created for them, the more loopholes they would have to act. For the governors of Pentos, the festival celebration held in the prince's palace 3 days later would be their best opportunity. Because at that time, Viserys entered the palace and closed the door, and no one outside knew what would happen inside. At that time, if Viserys died in an accident, or committed a crime, and was detained by Pentos for violating the guest rights, it would all depend on the governor's words. Although no one would believe such a poor excuse, at least in theory it was still tenable. Seeing Viserys enter the courtyard, these surveillance eyes began to report to their master nervously. The servant, who was obviously from the prince's palace, also got on the carriage and left here. Viserys was standing on the platform on the top floor of the mansion, holding the wooden railing, overlooking the undisguised eyes who were watching them. At this time, there were footsteps behind him. A fiery red figure gently gathered her robes and appeared behind Viserys. She looked behind Viserys, then opened her red lips and spoke. The task you assigned has already begun. Viserys held the railing with his hands, his lavender eyes looking at the setting sun. The red clouds filled the entire sky, and the cold wind blew and lifted the silver gold hair on his forehead. The heavy snow from last night to the day had stopped long ago. In the afternoon and before dusk, the clouds dispersed, and the sun shone down, restoring some temperature to this newly arrived winter. Now the sun is about to set again. The person standing behind Viserys was the Red God Priestess Melisandre, who had left Andalus and came to Pentus at some point. However, she did not go with Viserys, but came to the city-state quietly through other channels and secretly completed the tasks Viserys assigned to her. Well done, Melisandre. Viserys tilted his head slightly and glanced at the thinly dressed Red Witch. The other party seemed to be blessed by R'hllor's power, as if she could not feel the cold. Viserys wore leather armor and animal skins to keep warm, but the woman was still wearing a red robe. I saw the guidance of the Lord of Light in the flames. Melisandre took 2 steps forward and came to Viserys' side and stood shoulder to shoulder with the young king in front of the railing. Looking at the red clouds in the distance, the faint fragrance of the woman penetrated into the boy's sense of smell. Then Melisandre's beautiful eyes turned slightly and fell on Viserys. Pentus must belong to the true king. Chapter 199 Inspection. The next day, outside the city of Pentus, several hunter-like men carrying bows and arrows were talking to the guards outside the city gate. The reason was still the poor governor who died not long ago. Now Pentus still conducts strict inspections on mercenaries, caravan guards or hunters who enter the city with weapons and armor. However, Viserys and his guards who entered the city yesterday did not receive such treatment. My lord, we are all hunters from the surrounding villages. One of the thin men with a turban on his head patted a stag on the horse's back and said nice things to the guards. The deer looked like it had been dead for a long time, and the blood on its body had been drained. The hunters wanted to sell the deer in the market of Pentus in exchange for some food to go home. The guards of Pentus waved their hands impatiently. Get out. I've told you several times that you can go in and throw out all the weapons on your body. However, the hunters still pestered the guards and were unwilling to hand over their weapons. After all, this is the guy they eat, and Pentus is not peaceful. After all, Pentus is unable to go out to clear out bandits and robbers. The soldiers are scarce and poorly trained, so they can only entrust mercenaries or large caravans to deal with them. Small caravans and ordinary farmers and hunters need to fend for themselves. In such a chaotic world, farmers and hunters have to carry a dagger or a short sword when they go out, so that if they encounter bandits, they can at least resist 1 or 2. At least they can die bravely. Therefore, the hunters are unwilling to hand over their weapons and cling to the guards, and are unwilling to leave. At this time, gurgle, in the distance, a long caravan drove towards the gate of Pentus, and the wheels made a sound when they pressed over the small amount of snow left on the ground. It seems that another large caravan has arrived. Seeing the arrival of the caravan, the guards at the gate of Pentus lit up their eyes, knowing that this is another opportunity to make a fortune. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Come and gather together and check them thoroughly for me. The gate guard, who had received Viserys yesterday, adjusted his crooked helmet and called on his brothers to come and catch fish. On weekdays, caravans take the road near the port and rarely come in from the north gate. Without caravans coming from the north gate, the toll is naturally much less. The family spent so much money to bribe them to come to the garrison to work, naturally for the purpose of making money. Ordinary people may not have so much savings in several years or even decades. However, after coming to the garrison, they followed their leader, not to mention the happy life of eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. In a year, the toll collected by the card alone, minus the money paid to the commander-in-chief, was shared by the brothers below. At most, the huge amount of money spent on bribes by the family before was all recovered in 2 years, and the rest was net profit. Some small caravans or middle-class families in Pentus were lining up with a lot of gold coins, trying their best to send their unpromising children to work in the garrison. It was safe, and they could make money, so who wouldn't want to come? After hearing the conversation between the city gate guards, the hunters who had just pestered them looked at each other and saw the tension in each other's eyes. Then the tall and thin hunter who was carrying the deer on his horse looked at the mercenaries who were also blocked outside the city gate not far away. There was a tacit understanding in the eyes of the two groups of people, and they nodded to each other. Gilulu, the wheels of the carriages kept making sounds, and the long caravan finally arrived in front of the city gate of Pentus. Stop. Where did you caravan come from? The guard at the city gate adjusted his helmet, and his armor was almost impossible to put on, and then he walked over with a round belly. The hundreds of guards at the city gate were also attracted at once. The leader of the caravan was an old man with grey hair, who looked to be in his 50s or 60s, and dressed in a plain manner. He rode a tall grey warhorse, whose hair was a little matted, as if he had not taken a bath for a long time. "This is my hometown, my lord." The old man sat on the dirty horse and spoke in a low voice in the standard Valyrian language. He looked at the prosperous and rich city-state behind the city gate, and his eyes showed deep nostalgia. He had been away from here for half his life, and only dared to return today after disguising himself. "Don't talk nonsense to me. I asked you where you are from and which caravan." The fat city gate guard naturally understood Valyrian, but his attitude now was not as timid as when he faced visitors yesterday, and became extremely impatient. "I come from Tirosh, my lord." The old man riding on the grey warhorse was not angry, but just took a deep look at the city gate guard. Then he turned over and dismounted and spoke. "I rented a merchant ship from Tirosh to sell goods to Bravas, and then bought some goods from Bravas to Pentus. Pentus is very good. I'm not going to leave this time." The old man's voice was full of energy. Although he was old, he still maintained a very vigorous spirit and his eyes were extremely sharp. The leader of the Pentus gate guards couldn't help but shrink his neck, and his impatient attitude just now was restrained. Bravas. The Pentus people still had deep hostility towards Bravas. The guard snorted and deliberately prolonged the tone. "What goods are you selling? Are there any contraband? If there are, take them out in advance. If I find them, The fat guard deliberately prolonged the tone and said it like a pig. There was a threatened suggestion in his tone. At the same time, he raised his hand and opened the carriage covered with tattered cloth. There were some spices and even a few large boxes inside. What is this?" Then the fat officer's eyes immediately noticed those neatly arranged large boxes. According to his many years of experience, the black boxes at the bottom usually contain contraband. "We mainly sell spices, sir. And those black boxes contain walrus ivory from Loris, and we also purchased some." The grey-haired old man looked very calm and spoke calmly. "Bravas gathers goods from all over the world, and the price of spices is a little lower than that of Pentus, so transporting spices from Bravas to Pentus is a regular trade route, and some can be sold when passing through Indolus." Then the old man opened a black box, revealing the walrus ivory from Loris. "This expensive commodity may be collected by some wealthy businessmen or nobles. At this time." "Sir, what is this?" A Pentus guard seemed to have checked something strange and shouted loudly. Chapter 200 Blending in. The guard who walked to the rear of the convoy to check suddenly shouted loudly, instantly attracting the attention of many people outside the city gate. "What's going on?" There were many people coming in and out of the city gate. The group of mercenaries and the hunters on the other side seemed a little nervous and exchanged glances with each other again. Then, a tall and fat mercenary stood up among the mercenaries on the other side. His upper body was naked like a mountain, and his body was covered with tattoos. His belly and chest were covered with thick fat, and his arms and thighs were strong. He held a huge hammer in his hand. He stood up first and shouted loudly. He seemed a little excited, and even pushed and shoved with the guards at the city gate. "Hey, kid, why don't you let us enter the city?" The guards on the other side were attracted by the bigger changes here. "What are you doing? Put down your weapons." These days, Pentus has been strictly checking people who enter Pentus with weapons and armor. However, a giant city-state like Pentus has a huge daily population flow. Every day, there are people who come to Pentus for the first time, and they naturally cannot check their identities. There are no employed jobs in the city. Therefore, such disturbances and conflicts happen almost every day, and the guards have long been accustomed to it. Although they may not be able to beat these mercenaries alone, the garrison is backed by the city-state and the governors, so they surrounded them aggressively. "What's going on?" The walls of Pentus are very huge, and its gates are naturally very large. The fat officer was on the other side of the city gate. When he saw something suddenly happen on the other side, his brows frowned. At the same time, the hunters who were about to enter the city saw the conflict, and they pulled their horses and prayed directly to seize this opportunity and sneak into the city. However, just when they were about to sneak in, they were discovered by a sharp-eyed guard, who immediately shouted loudly, "Hey, stop, you bunch of damn bugs, who let you into the city?" Outside the gate of Pentus were not only these mercenaries and hunters, but also caravans. This city-state has a large population, and people come and go, so the city gates are often crowded. Several places suddenly changed, and the city gates were in chaos. Many other people outside the city gates also wanted to sneak into the city without being checked. When the hunters saw that they were discovered, they looked at each other, but did not stop. Instead, they quickened their pace, and pulled their horses into the crowd. Go, go. With the tacit cooperation of the mercenaries and hunters, and the booing of other people who were not sure whether they had any contact with them, there was chaos outside the gate of Pentus. Catch those people. The fat officer was furious when he saw this scene. The gray-haired old man looked at the fuss in front of him calmly at this moment, and then smiled coldly. Then he took out a heavy small cloth bag from his bosom, and secretly put it into the other party's hand. Thank you for your hard work, sir. Be accommodating, we will all get rich together. The gray-haired old man who looked like the leader of the caravan did not hide the fact that his caravan did have some contraband that was expressly prohibited by Pentus. Then he took out a bag of heavy gold coins to bribe the other party without any ambiguity. He was used to dealing with such people. Sometimes being straightforward is more effective than being subtle. The city gate guard had a gloomy face and was in a very bad mood. Collecting money was one thing, but there couldn't be any trouble at the city gate. At this moment, he had no time to thoroughly check the caravan, to see what the other party had loaded, and then threaten the other party to hand over more money. Seeing that the old man took out a purse very sensibly, he simply didn't continue to embarrass him. In fact, no caravan can withstand inspection. As long as he wants to check, he can find problems. As long as they pay the money obediently, it will be fine. If it's not too much, one carriage after another pulling armor and weapons, then turn a blind eye. Okay, let's get rich together. The fat officer took the purse, weighed it in his hand, and put it in his arms. Then he waved his hand to let the brothers who were checking behind him withdraw. There was no need to continue checking. First, maintain the order at the city gate. If there was a riot, he would have done his job as a vigilant officer, and a few guards chased in to catch those who sneaked into the city, some lawless mercenaries, and those cunning hunters just now. Gilulu. Then, this long caravan passed the inspection of the city gate normally and entered Pentus. It was really a close call. An ugly blonde woman in the caravan said to the people around her. She was burly and 6 feet tall, even taller than an ordinary man, with long blonde hair, a torn nose, no ears, and cross-shaped scars on both cheeks. Just now there was a boy staring at me. I wonder if he is in love with me. The woman's laughter was hoarse and low, and the words she said were even more chilling. I almost couldn't help but dig out his eyes. Next to the woman was a man with chrysanthemum blue eyes and flaxen white hair, with an awkward smile on his face. He was not as tall as the blonde woman next to him. He turned his head and looked up and down at the other person after hearing the woman's words, and then couldn't help but sneered. Beauty, are you attracted to him, or is he attracted to you? Beauty is the nickname of this blonde woman, and Maris is her name, but everyone's name in the group can be changed at will. The code name may be true, but the name is probably false. The young man is called Straw Dick, and he said this sentence, not just to humiliate the woman. When he first joined the group, he was forced by Beauty Maris to have intimate relations with her several times in the warehouse. But later he seemed to accept this woman, and the two of them would sometimes make appointments. After all, as a mercenary, you don't know when you will die, so you should enjoy yourself while you can. The gray-haired old man at the front of the team and the ferocious-looking man riding beside him were both silent. The man seemed to be a Dothraki, with sword scars all over his face, naked upper body, totem tattoos on his muscular muscles, and a black Arak scimitar on his waist. His name was Kago, and he was indeed a Dothraki who had left his tribe. He was once a slave, but later killed his master, and joined the mercenary group. Now he has become the captain of this mercenary group and the right-hand man of the gray-haired old man. Now, Kago heard the gossip of the brothers in the team, turned his head slightly to take a look, then retracted his gaze, and said in a deep voice, "Captain, has that guy Dunzo sneaked in?" End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.